Chapter 238. Luo Ro smiled mysteriously and said, "Of course, these aren't as simple as cannons. Otherwise, how could they enter your eyes? I specially designed them. Indeed, they are very troublesome to transport. If it was a war within the continent, the other side could easily destroy them with a cavalry charge. The biggest flaw of these things is that they can only be fired into the air and not horizontally. Especially after I improve them, they can't even fall with the weight of the cannonball. I named these cannons magic crystal cannons. They're the best weapons for attacking targets in the air." As she spoke, she walked behind a cannon and lifted the cloth behind it. Immediately, what appeared in front of Nianbing were 3 fiery red gems the size of a palm. The purity of these fire elemental gemstones was extremely high, and they were about the size of a palm. Danbei's consumption of these gemstones was comparable to his own god-killing crossbow. Nianbing could vaguely guess what Luo Ro was thinking. He said, "Your cannon does have many similarities with my god-killing crossbow. The barrel of the cannon should be adjustable. However, I don't understand why it can't attack downwards. Logically speaking, this shouldn't be very difficult." Luo Ro smiled bitterly and said, "You should be able to see that the cannonballs of the magic crystal cannons aren't physical. They are energy. I spared no effort in making 40 of these cannons. The amount of resources I used was enough to build a city. But when I finished making the magic crystal cannons, I discovered a problem. Although these magic crystal cannons are very powerful, their energy intensity is too high. Once they explode with a powerful attack, they will produce a huge recoil. But these magic crystal cannons can only be used by mages. Only with the cooperation of 3 great magician-level magicians would he be able to unleash that huge recoil. This is something that no one can withstand. Mages need to place their hands on these magic crystals. Once they explode with an attack, the huge recoil will immediately kill the mage. There is also a magic backlash. I carefully researched various methods. Finally, after much effort, I was able to make them shoot into the sky to reduce the recoil and recoil. As for future research, I will have to wait for an opportunity. The explosive power of these magic crystal cannons is very terrifying. A pure fire attribute attack can flatten a small mountain. At the very least, it should have the power of a tier 10 spell. Through the amplification of the gems, the magical power of the 3 magicians was effectively combined together, which was why such a powerful attack could be unleashed. However, every 3 magicians could only fire 5 cannons at most. After the research was completed, I set it as a sharp weapon against the air. Perhaps if I were given another 10 years to research, or if I were to obtain extremely pure gems, I would be able to create a real magic crystal cannon. However, it was too late now. This thing was just right to deal with those gods who could fly. The magic crystal cannons weren't made of steel. Instead, they were made of a special synthetic metal. I discovered it by accident during my experiments. This kind of metal doesn't have any resistance to magical elements. Instead, it has a certain amplification and protective effect. So, in the end, I can say that I succeeded halfway. Rower, you're really too scary. I'm afraid that only you can research this thing. The power of the god-killing crossbow was obviously greater than the magic crystal cannons, but it was also much lighter. However, that was completely based on Nianbing's strength. Without the god-killing crossbow created by Nianbing, the god-killing crossbow wouldn't be able to display its characteristics. However, the magic crystal cannons in front of them were different. As long as the magician's level was high enough, they could be activated. The precision of the design was something that the god-killing crossbow couldn't compare to. Although she hadn't seen it in action yet, Nianbing was almost certain that this thing would become one of the most terrifying killing machines in the continent. Fortunately, the research wasn't completely successful yet. Luo Ro glanced at Nianbing and said with a smile, "I know what you want to say. I also know how terrifying this thing is. However, the Ottoman Empire has been weak for a long time. If they don't have a peerless weapon, how can they protect themselves? That's why I didn't hesitate to use a large amount of resources to create these things. But now it seems that I still failed. Don't worry, if the gods are defeated this time, I won't continue to research them. After all, with you around, the Hwarung Empire will be somewhat afraid of our Ottoman Empire. When we become strong, why will we still need these things? These are the secrets of our Ottoman Empire, and they have already been revealed to you. If they can display their full potential in this battle, then my painstaking research won't be in vain. Now, the other 20 are in the opposite hills. As long as those gods dare to fly over, I will let them know how powerful we are. Nian Bing looked at Luo Ro with a smile and said, although they still don't know how powerful you are, I already know. Ro-er, you are really much more powerful than me. When the Ice Moon Empire forced you to leave, it was really a big mistake. All right, my Miss Ro-er, I have already seen these things. We should go back. There are still many things that we need to prepare. Oh, by the way, how is the situation with the refugees? Luo Ro glanced at Nian Bing and said, you don't have any good intentions towards those refugees. Otherwise, you would have sent them to the Ice Moon Lake long ago. Nian Bing sighed and said, you are so smart. Naturally, you can guess it. If it weren't for these refugees, how could those gods attack us? Although they are bait, I can guarantee that as long as I am still here, they will not be harmed. This is also something that can't be helped. Luo Ro smiled and said, I understand what you mean. Don't worry, I won't tell anyone. Oh, by the way, I can remind you now that your big brother Halogen has become the king of the dwarves. He is now mingling with those dwarves. And Miss Yu has become the recognized queen of these refugees. In the future, how to deal with these tens of thousands of refugees, I still need you to think about it. Nian Bing smiled bitterly and said, it is better for you to help me think about this kind of problem. I am now focused on the battle. I really don't have the energy to think about these things. Luo Ro rolled her eyes and said, I can say that I don't completely belong to any empire. But in the future, the Lost Continent will belong to your 4 great empires. What does it have to do with me? Of course I don't care. With Big Brother Halogen and you can consider it as giving them face. You will also treat these refugees well. Therefore, I don't need to care about them. I think that with your intelligence, you naturally know how to do things that are beneficial to the Ottoman Empire. Although these refugees don't have their own civilization, they have their own talents. However, they had their own talents. According to the legends, the elves were the best archers in the Lost Empire, while the dwarves were the best blacksmiths. With Big Brother Halogen, the dwarves' advantages will be revealed soon. I don't believe that you won't be tempted. Luo Ro shook her head helplessly and said, sometimes, I think you are very stupid, because you are willing to give up everything for things that don't have much to do with you. But sometimes, you are really slippery. Nian Bing, tell me, what kind of person are you? Nian Bing smiled and said, of course I'm a man. Why? Do you want to try? As soon as he said that, he wanted to slap himself. He knew that Luo Ro was interested in him, but he still said that. Wasn't he looking for trouble? This mouth of his. Why was it getting more and more annoying? In fact, even he himself did not know that after his parents had rescued him, his heart had gradually relaxed. His mood had improved, and his emotions and personality had inevitably been somewhat affected. His previous depression had gradually been vented out. Sure enough, although Luo Ro's face was red, she bravely looked at Nian Bing. She was about to speak, but Nian Bing hurriedly said, I still have something to do, I'll go first. I'll let my subordinates report to you later. After that, she instantly left the hill. Looking at the place where Nian Bing disappeared, Luo Ro was stunned for a moment. Then she angrily stomped her feet and said, you coward. Ran away from Luo Ro's threat. Nian Bing let out a long breath and couldn't help but smile bitterly. Beautiful women were good, but if there were too many of them, it wasn't necessarily a good thing. However, it felt good to have Luo Ro here. With her in charge, he could relax a lot. From morning until now, he hadn't had time to rest. Now, he was about to face the attack of the Divine Race Army. Nian Bing found a quiet place and directly used plus or minus magic to dive into the ground and began to cultivate. Just like when he was forced to comprehend Xiantian Qi under Fatso's pressure. Not much time passed. In just 2 days, the 7 Dragon King had returned. 2 days. Luo Ro had made many arrangements. Nian Bing, on the other hand, was very relaxed. Every day, he would simply discuss battle methods with the powerhouses and then cultivate alone. Now, it could be said that he was the sharpest sword in Luo Ro's hands. The news brought by the seven dragon kings naturally came from the divine race. The divine race had already arrived at the Yangon continent and was advancing in a straight line. Their target was precisely where they were. Nian Bing gave this war name, the Great War of the Gods, the war between the Yangon continent and the divine race. Compared to the Great War of the Gods, this war wasn't inferior. Almost all of the powerhouses of the Yangon continent had gathered at this place that was about to become the battlefield of the Great War of the Gods. Everyone was nervously preparing for the upcoming battle. They only had one goal, and that was to achieve the final victory. The seven dragon kings continued to scout. In order to prevent being discovered, they could only observe the movements of the divine race army from afar. From the divine race to where Nian Bing was, it would take at least 4 to 5 days. After all, not all of the divine race could fly. Most of the divine servant strength could only be considered above average in the Yangon continent. Therefore, there were still 4 to 5 days of final preparation before the war. Kitty, you don't have to participate in the first wave of battle. I'm afraid that your pets won't be able to retreat in time. Nian Bing looked at Kitty with concern. He had always treated her as a little sister. Kitty stubbornly shook her head and said, "No, I want to participate. These divine race were the executioners of my parents. I want to avenge my parents. Brother Nian Bing, the white race was destroyed because of them." At this point, her eyes couldn't help but redden. Nian Bing was surprised to find that Kitty was no longer the little girl from before. Compared to before, she was more mature. Apart from her tone, her appearance and figure had grown into a stunning beauty. She wasn't inferior to the Wind Maiden and the others. Coupled with her delicate tone, it was easy for her to give people a feeling of closeness. Seeing that Nian Bing wasn't speaking, Kitty hurriedly said, "Brother Nian Bing, let me participate. I'll be careful. My little pets are very good at protecting themselves. I promise you, as long as you retreat, I'll immediately recall them. You know that I can recall them to the space." Nian Bing frowned and said, "But your body can't withstand the attacks of those divine race. There's a distance between you and your pets. Otherwise, they won't be able to sense your thoughts. Their strength will be greatly reduced, and they might even cause chaos. Therefore, I think it's better for you to take action later in the battle." Kitty said with some grievance, "No, I want to be the first wave of attacks. At worst, you can just protect me." Nian Bing, let Kitty go with you. You have to believe in her strength. Her spiritual magic is already very powerful. Besides, we'll protect her. As long as we retreat in time, there won't be any problems. Blue and red figures lit up. Feng Nu and Lan Chun had arrived. These days, they were still studying the heart of the phoenix. However, the results were very ordinary. They didn't make any breakthroughs. Smiling, Nian Bing's eyes revealed a faint essence. He looked deeply at Kitty and said, "All right then. When the time comes, you guys keep an eye on her. I want to be the main attacker. Moreover, under the counterattack of the divine race, I'll have to resist their attacks. I'll leave Kitty to you guys." The Dragon King returned as scouts for the last time. The news they brought was very simple. In one more day, the divine race would set foot on this land. On Nian Bing's side, all the preparations were completed under Luo Ro's command. The experts of the Rangoon continent also had to start preparing. A day's time was sometimes very long and sometimes very short. When the sun flew to the center of the sky, a huge invisible pressure had already rushed towards the elite coalition forces of Rangoon from the front. Luo Ro stood at the front of the army. The 7 elders of the Blood Lion cult were beside her. They were all waiting. At this time, Luo Ro was still wearing a white dress. She stood out among the steel guards around her. However, standing at the front of the army, she brought confidence to all the soldiers. Luo Ro raised her right hand. Clearly, she hadn't seen the divine race yet. However, the aura told her everything. The elite army of the Four-Nation Alliance quietly sneaked into the trenches that they had dug earlier. On the surface, everything seemed to be calm now. Under the leadership of Halogen and Yu, the survivors were scattered at the back of the army. They looked in the direction of the pressure from afar. They didn't panic. Although they didn't know how powerful the forces that were coming were, they believed that the dwarf king and goddess in front of them could save them. Sometimes, faith played a very important role. Luo Ro was still standing there. The empty space around her set off her beautiful appearance. She didn't panic at all. She continued to look in front of her from afar. However, there were a few more things in her hands. What should come would come. Luo Ro's analysis was very accurate. As the king of the divine race, Shi Jie had considered many possibilities. However, after he received news of the lost continent, he thought that it wouldn't take too much effort to eliminate these survivors. This time, he led all the divine race out in full force. His real target was the Rangoon continent. The lost continent was only a simple springboard. Only the prosperity of the Rangoon continent was what he hoped for. Along the way, Shi Jie couldn't help but be shocked when he saw the barren lost continent. Other divine race might not know, but as the king of the divine race, how could he not know the reason behind all this? Regarding the might of the three great true gods, he had a profound understanding once again. Ever since he set foot on the lost continent, he led the army of divine race to advance at the fastest speed. It wasn't because he was afraid that the survivors would escape, but because the food and water that the divine race could bring out from the lost continent was too little. These powerful divine race could hold on for a while if they didn't eat, but if even the water was slippery, other than the divine race experts, ordinary divine race experts would find it difficult to endure. Therefore, he led these divine race experts with the intention to eliminate the last survivors of the lost continent and immediately head to the Rangoon continent. Once there, all the supply problems would naturally be solved. Shi Jie was also arrogant. Although Nian Bing killed a divine race expert and seriously injured another divine race expert, he didn't believe that the Rangoon continent would react quickly even if they knew that his army of divine race experts was coming to attack. He was afraid that they wouldn't be able to resist. Therefore, he came with full confidence, but he didn't know that an invisible net was waiting for them in silence. Shi Jie's biggest mistake was that he didn't calculate the influence that Nian Bing had on the Rangoon continent's four great empires. Of course, this couldn't be blamed on him. If it were anyone else, they wouldn't have thought that a person who wasn't famous in the Rangoon continent would have such influence. Unexpectedly, she had such a close relationship with the Rangoon continent's four great empires. The number of divine race experts flying in the air was less than what Nian Bing and Luo Ro had estimated. There were only about 20 of them, but these 20 included 5 divine race experts and 18 divine race experts. They were the true powerhouses among the divine race experts. As the powerhouses among the divine race experts, they were very arrogant. Therefore, they chose to fly. This way, not only could they see further, but it could also reflect their status. Although the divine race experts could barely fly, ordinary divine race experts needed them to lead them. Therefore, they walked on the ground. The troop of divine race experts wasn't orderly. They weren't an army, but more than 10,000 experts. Therefore, the speed at which this disorderly troop moved forward was very astonishing. When Luo Ro felt the enormous pressure, it only took a few breaths for the army of divine race experts to appear in the distance. Shi Jie flew in the middle of the divine race experts in the air. The divine race experts and divine race experts around him clustered around him. Although he was arrogant, he was a cautious person. He had more or less made some preparations for this operation. For example, the dragon god and the divine race. More than 100 dragons were flying at the back of the troop. He purposely separated the dragons from his divine race army. Initially, he wanted to let the dragon god stay with them, but the dragon god said that he couldn't leave his people. Therefore, he stayed at the back with all the dragons. What made Shi Jie more satisfied was that the dragons, including the dragon god, had mobilized all the adult dragons for this operation. This was definitely a very powerful force. One had to know that even the weakest adult dragon had the ability of level 10 to level 11. The strongest among the dragons were around level 12, second only to the 7 great dragon king and the dragon god who were left behind in the Yangon mainland. These dragons could become a terrifying force just by relying on their bodies. Furthermore, Shi Jie was very clear about the spiritual pressure that the dragons had on the Yangon mainland. Master Shi Jie, we're almost there, a divine race expert said softly behind Shi Jie. Shi Jie's eyes flashed. From afar, he had already seen the existence of the remnant citizens below. He couldn't help but reveal a cold glint on his face as he waved his hand forward. Killing these remnant citizens was as easy as crushing ants. There was no need for the divine race experts flying in the sky to do anything. The divine servants and divine race experts below could easily deal with them. Shi Jie's signal caused the divine race experts below to speed up. Shi Jie and the others also increased their flying speed. He wanted to witness this bloody massacre with his own eyes. The speed of the divine race experts below was extremely fast. Silence. Luo Ro looked at the approaching enemies without any change in her expression. A small scroll appeared in her hand. This scroll was specially designed for her by Nian Bing. It didn't require any magic power and could be used easily. It wasn't used to attack. Shi Jie was flying forward when suddenly his cloud-hearing acupoint, which had reached the ultimate realm, moved slightly. He could faintly hear some strange sounds as if something was being stretched under the influence of a huge force. His heart, which had been very relaxed, suddenly beat violently twice. His eyes flashed, and the cloud-hearing acupoint's ability immediately covered the area below. Although he was flying a height of 300 feet above the ground, with his ability, his cloud-hearing acupoint could clearly hear even the slightest movement below. When the cloud-hearing acupoint's feedback entered his brain, Shi Jie's expression changed. This was because he had just heard the sound of close to 200,000 heartbeats. A huge sound wave instantly came from his mouth. Stop moving forward. There's an ambush. Everyone retreat. Shi Jie's voice was very loud. With his ability, when his voice left his mouth, it clearly entered the ears of every divine race expert. However, it was still too late for him to realize this. Right in front of them, he saw a beautiful lady in white. The lady shook her wrist, and a ball of red light rose into the sky. When it rose to a height of 100 feet, it suddenly exploded. It was a ball of flame, but at the same time, it also looked like a huge blood flower. Lights and shadows. Countless lights and shadows shot out from the surrounding hills and hills. Some of the lights and shadows were very clear, while others were very blurry. Shi Jie and the others were in the air. They were like the best helpers. They watched as the locust-like attacks attacked them. The sudden attack made Shi Jie frown slightly. Although he didn't understand why so many people suddenly appeared here, he still didn't feel anxious. This was because he didn't think that in this world, other than those few true gods, there was no one else. Who else could pose a threat to his existence? There was no need for Shi Jie or the other 4 overgods to take action. The 18 god-level experts activated their fighting energy at the same time. A ball of rainbow-like light exploded around their bodies and blocked the heavy crossbows that were shot at them. To their fighting energy, these tyrannical armor-piercing arrows weren't even a scratch. Looking at the fighting energy light emitted by the divine race experts in the air, a faint smile appeared on Luo Ro's face. This wasn't the real first wave of attack. Instead, it was one of the steps she took to show her weakness to her enemies. What she needed was to stop the divine race experts above from taking action. However, this first wave of attack obviously wouldn't be able to achieve that. Just as the 18 divine race experts in the air activated their fighting energy defense, the divine race experts below, who had yet to recover from their shock, suddenly felt the ground tremble. Amidst the loud rumbles, the ground actually collapsed, including the demigod experts. The tens of thousands of divine race experts below fell into a state of panic. More than 10 gigantic demonic beasts appeared out of thin air. A few low-level divine servants couldn't dodge in time and were instantly torn into pieces. Nearly 20 figures lit up with a dazzling light. The massacre began in an instant. Nian Bing and the others were hiding underground. The ground where the divine race experts had set foot On had long been hollowed out. With the existence of the two dark demon rats, this wasn't a difficult task. Those who suddenly appeared from underground were led by Nian Bing. Prince Rong, Nian Bing's mother Bing Ling, and Bing Jie didn't participate in this operation. This was because such close-range attacks weren't suitable for mages like them. Of course, Nian Bing was an anomaly. He was the leader of these attackers. A seven-colored light shot out from Nian Bing's body like lightning. As soon as he appeared, the seven sword souls each took the lives of 4 to 5 divine servants. After 3 days of strengthening by Nian Bing, the strength of each sword soul had increased. The sudden sneak attack immediately had the desired effect. Of course, Nian Bing wasn't idle either. At the same time that the 7 sword souls shot out, 4 forbidden spells were released around his body. The place he chose was very good. It was right in the middle of the divine race experts. There were only the lowest level divine servants here. These divine servants were mostly 8th or 9th level divine servants. The difference between them and Nian Bing was too great. 4 forbidden spells of the 11th level were released in an instant. The effect was that with Nian Bing as the center, there were no living creatures within a radius of 20 feet. At least a few hundred divine race experts died under his sudden attack. These divine race experts all had fighting aura. If they could work together, although Nian Bing's magic attack was very fierce, it wouldn't be able to cause such great damage. The root of all this was the word sudden. The divine race experts had never thought that they would be ambushed. This time, Nian Bing was the main powerhouse in the sneak attack. There were also Halogen, Feng Nu, and Lan Chen. The 4 of them formed the most elite force. Originally, Nian Bing wanted to let the sacred teacher participate in this sneak attack, but the sacred teacher insisted. Although he was willing to fight against the divine race for the survival of the Yangon continent, he would never agree to a sneak attack. Of course, there were also 7 people who participated in this sneak attack. No, it should be 7 giant dragons. The 7 Dragon King had all transformed into human form. When they appeared together with Nian Bing and the other 3, it immediately became a disaster for the ordinary divine servants. In almost an instant, nearly 1,000 divine servants had died under the joint attack of these 11 people. This might seem simple, but it was ingenious. Nian Bing and the other 11 people were completely spread out, allowing them to fully unleash their power in the attack. If it wasn't for the fact that Nian Bing wanted to conserve her spiritual energy to deal with the over-gods above, the number of casualties would have been much higher. However, even so, the loss of 1,000 people in an instant made Shi Jie, who was in the air, almost explode with anger. He never thought that the first battle after leaving the divine race would start like this. After a short period of sneak attack, the divine race experts began to show their strength. All the divine servants retreated to the surroundings, while the demigods came forward. There were also differences in the strength of demigods. The stronger ones were close to rank 13, while the weaker ones were around rank 12. Once more than 100 demigods surrounded them. Nian Bing and the rest of the demigods' damage figures were greatly reduced. Every second could only be counted in digits. Gods above level 12 were very powerful, so it was not easy to kill them. Shi Jin naturally could not allow such a situation to continue. He recognized the 7 Dragon King below at a glance, but it was too late for him to give an order. He waved his hand and flew down with the other 4 overgods. Almost all of them had activated the Earth Spirit Cave. They only needed a few flashes to enter the battlefield below. Shi Jie had already made up his mind. No matter who these people below were, he would completely destroy them for daring to kill the divine race experts. However, at this moment, there was a sudden change on the battlefield. Another round of crossbows soared into the sky. The shining red and blue lights were obviously more sparse than the previous heavy crossbows. The crossbows were facing the overgods and divine rank experts who were preparing to charge down. Chapter 239. Naturally, Shi Jie did not care about these things. From his point of view, even if he did not use his combat energy to defend himself, he could easily withstand the attack of these crossbow arrows with his body that was stronger than dragons. However, the The red and blue lights soon told him a fact. These are not ordinary crossbow bolts. They were specially made to kill gods. The violent explosion caused a complete change in the magic elements in the sky. The destructive energy only lasted for a moment before it stopped the lords from descending. Perhaps a level 11 forbidden spell was just a joke to the lords. However, what if 100 forbidden spells appeared at the same time? It was impossible for Shi Jie to not take this seriously. Moreover, they were confused by their previous show of weakness. The sudden attack produced an even greater power. Shi Jie was alarmed when Xia Yu, who had been demoted from the ranks of the lords, exclaimed. Others might not have seen it, but Xia Yu had seen the power of these god-slaying arrows. The power of a lord could only be truly experienced in battle. 5 balls of milky white light dispersed at the same time as the explosion. Not only did they protect the bodies of the 5 lords, but they also protected the 18 god-ranked experts around them. How powerful was the power of 100 forbidden spells formed by 200 god-slaying arrows? No one could answer, and no one could calculate. However, what made Luo Ro's heart beat faster was that the strongest among the gods were not killed by the 100 forbidden spells. Just this point alone was enough to shock her. She finally understood why Nian Bing was so afraid of these lords. Below, Kitty's magical beasts were still unleashing their power crazily. Nian Bing was also killing nonstop. Although the strongest gods in the sky had resisted the attack of the god-slaying arrows, their downward momentum had turned into an upward charge. After all, the god-slaying arrows were created by Nian Bing and the rest in an instant, and it was not a short instant. When Shi Jie forcefully used his combat energy to force away the frantic magic elements around him, he was finally enraged. At the same time, he knew that he had underestimated the humans. It's the people from the Yangon continent, that guy below who is constantly using magic. It's him who killed Gu Long. Xia Yu glared hatefully at Nian Bing. If it weren't for him, she wouldn't have lost her position as the chief god. The Shi world did not utter a word. He waved his hands at the same time, and 2 huge golden beams of light shot down. They actually passed through the second wave of god-slaying arrows, heading straight for Nian Bing. The other 4 over-gods attacked at the same time as well. To them, distance was not absolute. At this moment, the sovereigns were standing in front of the surrounding deities. They had demonstrated their chief god-level power. When the Shi world had just launched its attack, Nian Bing could clearly feel the pressure from above. However, he did not panic at all. Of course, he knew that once he was completely locked on by that kind of attack, he wouldn't even have the chance to escape. He could only choose to fight head-on. However, he was already prepared. Almost in an instant, 11 balls of silver light lit up at the same time, and a dozen or so magical beasts disappeared at the same time. The attacks of the overgods froze in midair. Immediately after, Shi Jie saw a blob of blood blossoming in the air. What was the power of overgod? After launching an attack, they could still forcefully change the direction of the violent energy. That was the power of overgod. With Shi world as the leader, although the 5 overgods had lost track of Nian Bing and the others, their attacks did not stop. All 10 beams of light swept toward the hilly area on both sides. They wanted to eliminate the lurkers who had almost brought them harm. However, at this moment, 40 booms were heard. 40 huge balls of red light soared into the sky and met their attacks. Those were 40 fireballs, and each of them was extremely condensed. Unfortunately, the fireballs were swallowed by the profound divine light in an instant. Following the direction of the fireball's attack, a total of 120 mages from the Ottoman Empire disappeared along with the magic crystal cannons invented by Luo Ro. However, they had, after all, slowed down the time and power of the destruction. Although thousands of crossbowmen had lost their lives in the violent explosion, the Blood Guards and the elites of the Frozen Moon Hall who had fired 2 arrows had just retreated out of the explosion's range and were not harmed. Their god-slaying crossbows had also been saved. Although Luo Ro had released the second signal, her heart was bleeding at this moment. Those magic crystal cannons had cost her so much effort. When she was researching these magic crystal cannons, She had never thought that there would be anyone who could go against them. However, at that moment, she had watched her hard work turn into ashes along with those 120 precious mages. Those mages accounted for almost a third of all the high-ranking mages in the Ottoman Empire. War was cruel. As a commander, one must not be affected by one's emotions. Luo Ro naturally understood this, so she did not stop her accusations. The first wave of attacks had ended, but the second wave had just begun. The low chanting had already started when the first blood flower bloomed, and now was the time for them to unleash their power. Thousands of red lights condensed in the air, causing the entire world to turn red. The air became noticeably hotter, and a purple light was injected into the dazzling red. The red light seemed to have found its source and quickly condensed together. The violent fire dragon transformed into an incomparably huge fire dragon in the air. The fire dragon was over 100 feet long. Even if the Dragon King and the Dragon Gods were to rush over, they would not be able to compare to its size. Shi Jie, who was about to continue his attack, stopped. Looking at the huge flame, his gaze froze. This was an energy that could threaten him. The power of this magic had even surpassed the 14th level and was close to the 15th level. He saw this spell, and so did all the other gods. Following the disappearance of Nian Bing, the humans, and the magical beasts, all the gods quickly gathered together and worked together to activate their combat energy. In an instant, the ground was filled with various colors of light. The real powerful aura had just appeared at this moment. Previously, under the leadership of the Ice Spirit, the 100 mages of the Ice God Tower had once condensed a 14th level Ice Lotus. It was this Ice Lotus. It temporarily stopped Gulong and Xia Yu's attack. Although the mages of the Rong family were not comparable to the mages of the Ice God Tower, they had the advantage in terms of numbers. They had 1,000 mages and above. Under the leadership of Prince Rong and his two younger brothers, after many years of hard work, they finally activated their secret weapon, Fire Element Super Fusion Magic. The initial research of this magic had only one goal, and that was the Ice God Tower. It was also because of the existence of this magic that Prince Rong had disrespected the existence of the Ice Goddess and launched an invasion of the Kiru Empire. He was preparing to occupy the entire Yangon mainland. This was the Huarong Empire's strongest attack. Shi Jie snorted coldly. A faint golden light was emitted. It did not seem to be emitted from his acupuncture points, but from every corner of his body. Among all the gods, he was the only one who could achieve this. It was not an ability similar to light magic, but pure combat energy. The strength of this combat energy was extremely terrifying. Apart from Kitty, the 10 or so figures that had disappeared in an instant earlier all appeared in midair. Under the leadership of Nian Bing, the 7 Dragon Kings, the Feng Nu sisters, and the dwarf Halogen appeared in front of the overgods and gods in the sky at the same time. They looked at the faint golden light emitted from Shi Jie's body. Nian Bing was also secretly shocked, but he did not have the slightest fear. He said coldly, "Your opponents are us." The 7 sword souls floated out, and the 7-colored light of the sky, I-Realm, instantly enveloped all the experts on his side. At this moment, 2 blue figures appeared behind them at lightning speed. They were Nian Bing's mother, Bing Ling, and his master's wife, Bing Jie. The appearance of the 2 women increased the strength of Nian Bing's side by a few notches. On Nian Bing's side, there were at least 4 people who could reach level 14. They were him, Halogen, Emperor Kurobutsu, and Bing Jie, as well as other level 13 experts. Even if their overall strength was not as strong as the gods in front of them, it was definitely not much stronger. It was also because of this reason that Luo Ro dared to let them block the enemy's attack. Shi Jie looked coldly at Nian Bing. His gaze seemed to have materialized. Apart from anger, there was also a hint of mockery in his eyes. He did not seem to care about the massive magic power of the thousands of fire mages in the distance. He said indifferently, "Is this the strength of you humans? I didn't expect this. The countries of the Yangon continent actually have such foresight, daring to block our advance here. However, do you think you can stop us with this?" You're underestimating the strength of the godly mainland. Nian Bing's eyes shone with a cold light. Whether we can stop you or not is not something that can be determined by your words. Let's see how strong we really are. From the looks of it, you should be the leader of the gods. In that case, I shall be your opponent. Although he could clearly feel that the energy intensity of Shi Jie's body was very strange, he still fought bravely. As the strongest person in the Yangon continent, he naturally had to face the strongest person on the other side, who was also the leader of all the gods. Shi Jie snorted in disdain. You're not worthy. For golden lights lit up at the same time. Apart from Shi Jie, the four overgods' attack was very simple. They all slapped out their right hands at the same time. For golden lights went straight for the 7 sword souls at the front of the crowd. The 18 god-level experts behind them also moved. A massive amount of energy was rendered, and various colors of combat energy rushed toward the crowd in the most condensed form. Nian Bing was not angered by Shi Jie's words. At their level, it was very simple and important to stay calm. When everyone started to attack, Nian Bing's sky territory suddenly changed. The original rainbow light instantly turned into a faint golden color. This faint golden color of the mages increased the power of everyone on their side instantly. The 7 sword souls at the front formed a vertical line. With Emperor Kurobutsu as the leader, they slashed their swords at the same time. The rainbow light met the golden light of the 4 overgods head-on. The battle between them became the start of the real battle. However, the explosive force produced by their mutual attack made all the attacks from the others become meaningless. The golden light and the rainbow light collided in the air. In that short moment, it was as if there was an additional sun in the sky. The intense light did not bring about a roar, but regardless of whether it was the gods or Nian Bing's side, they were all thrown back by the violent explosion. Light and shadow flickered. Dozens of top-notch experts from both sides only made contact for a short moment before they broke away from the trajectory of the attack. They were pushed hundreds of feet away by the aftershock. At this moment, the fire magic that had been prepared for a long time exploded. At the same time, Nian Bing's sharp sky acupoint was shocked to discover that Shi Jie, who did not attack, had suddenly disappeared before her eyes. Using combat energy to perform short-distance teleportation was something that every powerful martial warrior could do. However, in such a violent collision that produced such a huge amount of energy at the same time, being able to teleport away without being affected by the energy was something that even Nian Bing, who was proficient in 7 elemental magic, could not do. However, Shi Jie was able to do it. The objective of Nian Bing and the others was very simple. In a situation where their overall strength was inferior to their opponents, they would follow Luo Ro's arrangement and target the magicians to hold back the powerful gods, while Prince Rong led the fire magic experts to launch their strongest attacks. They would exhaust the gods' strength as much as possible. In just a short moment, they would be able to weaken the enemy's overall strength. Every god they killed was very important to them. However, Shi Jie's sudden disappearance made Ling Nian Bing feel that something was amiss. The 300-meter-long flame dragon had already turned dark purple. The combined power of 1,000 mages of the same element was extremely terrifying, especially since they had been working together for a long time. These elites of the Rong family all had extraordinary talent in magic. They had been cultivating since they were young to achieve what they had today. This fire dragon was actually the result of the complete compression of the fire magic. In order to launch this magic, almost all of the Rong family magicians had released all of their magical power. The power of this magic had reached its peak in an instant. When the gods below saw the appearance of this terrifying magic, they panicked. However, they quickly calmed down. The demigod experts rushed to the front of the team as fast as they could. Close to 9,000 gods circulated their combat energy at the same time. It was very difficult for combat energy to attack together like magic. After all, combat energy was not like magic. Its attack range was limited. Of course, when one reached an extremely high level, this limitation no longer existed. However, These deities who had been living in the harsh conditions of the continent of gods, all this while had their own way of dealing with it. Almost all of them were in groups of dozens, fusing their combat chi together as they waited for the arrival of the giant magic spell. The fire dragon, that was 100 feet long, looked extremely terrifying. When it stretched its body and suddenly pounced forward, the surrounding air did not distort due to the heat. At this moment, all of the air around the fire dragon had been ignited. The area within 1,000 feet radius had completely turned into a terrifying vacuum. Even Prince Rome did not expect this to happen. The power of this magic was too great. When it pounced forward, no one could control its attack power. Everything was done by this terrifying magic. When the fire dragon was still 1,000 feet away from the gods, they could already feel the suffocating heat. At this time, in order to protect their own lives, all of the gods did not hold back and push their combat energy to the limit. They all knew that they could only block this magic if they worked together. Of course, Prince Rome understood that even though the offensive power of the 1,000 mages was terrifying, there were still 9,000 gods on the other side. If they attacked evenly from the sky, then under the effect of the many battle chis, the damage would be negligible. Therefore, when the fire dragon received his last order, the huge dragon god swooped down. When it was about 300 meters away from the gods, the huge dragon god was already level with the ground. It was charging straight at the gods from a front. By doing this, they could kill the gods to the greatest extent. Although they could definitely block it, the gods at the front would definitely be severely injured. In the face of this magic that was close to level 15, the demigod's chances of survival were absolutely zero. Except for Nian Bing, everyone on the Yangon side thought that the plan was a success. They were all ready to watch the fire dragon slaughter the gods. Even Luo Ro was gratified by the success of her plan. Her gloomy mood from the previous loss also recovered a little. If someone had told Luo Ro a few years ago that a single person's strength could change the entire battlefield, she would definitely not have believed it. However, after witnessing Nian Bing's strength, she had a certain understanding of this saying. But today, the enemy they were facing gave her a very vivid lesson. A gigantic flame dragon that was over 300 meters long. Its enormous body was so terrifying. When it flew close to the ground, the soil on the ground naturally disappeared, forming a deep trench. However, just as it was charging forward with all its strength, a golden figure appeared. Amidst the cheers of the gods, a golden figure suddenly appeared at the front of the gods. He did not wait and charged straight at the fire dragon. Prince Rome's eyes widened. He couldn't believe that a single person dared to face the attacks of 1,000 fire mages on his side alone. However, the truth was right in front of his eyes. The other party had done just that. In the next moment, Prince Rome felt his entire body tremble under the influence of the magic. He felt a sharp pain in his brain, and his mental strength dropped rapidly. He could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood. The golden light was so small in front of the gigantic flame dragon, but it was so firm. Shi Jie was facing such a huge magic spell alone, but his expression did not change at all. It was as if he was never worried about his own safety. He raised both of his hands, and the rich golden light transformed into a huge golden shield with a diameter of 3 feet. He held it with his left hand and blocked the gigantic flame dragon that was charging in front of him. The huge impact caused Shi Jie's body to retreat continuously. As his body slid backward, the golden shield in his hand exploded with an unusually strong golden light. It was an incomparably strong light. Another sun appeared on the ground. The flaming dragon roared as it charged madly. The power of the incomparably condensed primordial fire had been unleashed to its limit. All 9,000 gods were retreating rapidly, and the Shi world was also retreating under the attack of the flaming dragon. At this moment, everyone could see that Shi Jie's speed of retreat was gradually slowing down. The golden light on his left hand was also becoming more and more intense. Shi Jie's calm face flushed red. Both his eyes had turned completely golden. Nian Bing, who was in the air, wanted to attack downwards. However, The 4 over-gods and 18 god-level experts in front of him did not allow him to do so. Although the 4 over-gods were wary of Nian Bing's mental strength attack, their coordination was extremely good. Nian Bing did not have the opportunity to use his tyrannical attack. He could only rely on the sky's eye realm to increase the strength of his attackers. He could not leave now. Otherwise, the experts on his side would definitely be defeated by his opponents. The sky's eye realm that Nian Bing was currently using was an evolved ability. When he completely understood the mystery of combining 2 acupoints into one, his sky's eye realm had undergone a change. Not only did it possess offensive power, but it also possessed the ability to convert. What would be the effect of combining the extreme Emperor Acupoint's ability with the sky's eye realm? The effect was very simple. It was to combine the original 3 abilities of the sky's eye realm into one and increase its strength greatly. The original abilities of the sky's eye realm were defense, weakening, and amplification. His ability to weaken the battle chi would have little effect on these god-ranked experts. After all, it was almost impossible to weaken their battle chi at this level. Moreover, these god-ranked experts all had different battle chi attributes. If every attribute was weakened, then it wouldn't be just the opponent that would be affected. Therefore, Nian Bing chose to amplify it. With the help of the extreme Emperor Acupoint, the sky's eye realm that was amplified at full power was unleashed to a superb level. Under his amplification effect, the 7 sword souls under the leadership of Emperor Kurobutsu managed to block the first attack of the 4 lords. This bought time for the others to attack and also gave the flaming dragon a chance to destroy it. If the She world had not suddenly appeared below, their plan would have succeeded. Under the super amplification effect of the sky's eye realm, although the 7 sword souls needed some time to recover, the 4 lords' energy was shaken to a certain extent. The sword souls were immortal. Under Nian Bing's full power, the West Meridian Acupoint helped them recover their strength very quickly. At the very least, without the She world's interference, the overall strength of Nian Bing's side was no weaker than the god-level experts in front of them. Of course, there were also god-level experts who wanted to launch a sneak attack on Nian Bing and destroy the human who had caused them the most trouble. However, would the experts on Nian Bing's side give them the chance to do so? The answer was no. Under the lead of Halogen and Bing Jie, Nian Bing's team of experts attacked with all their might. Under the protection of the 7 Dragon Kings, if they wanted to kill Nian Bing, they would have to step over the corpses of the people in front of them. The advantage of the 4 lords did not appear. On the other hand, Nian Bing's 7 sword souls were recovering continuously. On the battlefield, Nian Bing's side had a slight upper hand. However, at this moment, Nian Bing did not feel relaxed at all. Instead, she felt unusually heavy. Why was that? It was because the She world's performance was too valiant. It was so valiant that no one could imagine it. There was a fundamental difference between spells close to level 15 and level 14. Nian Bing asked himself, even if he worked with 7 sword souls, even if she had 7 sword souls with 7 sword souls, she would not dare to face the joint attack of 1,000 mages head-on. However, the She world did it. At this moment, the She world had retreated about 500 feet from the moment he used the golden shield to block the attack of the flaming dragon. The god-level experts had also retreated 500 feet. However, the speed at which She world retreated had become extremely slow. The impact of the flaming dragon had obviously weakened. However, the golden shield that She world produced was still as dazzling as before. Anyone could see that this level 15 super spell could no longer achieve its original goal. This was all because of one person. No, it should be called a god. At this moment, the people of the Yangon continent truly felt how terrifying a god-level expert strength was. The She world's defense ended very quickly. Other than using his left hand to raise the shield to block the flaming dragon, he still had his right hand. What would his right hand do? The She world clearly told the humans of the Yangon continent. A 5-foot-long golden battle sword appeared in his right hand. It was not condensed from fighting energy. It was a genuine battle sword. If Halogen had the time to look at it now, he would definitely be shocked to discover that the strength of the energy of this battle sword was definitely a super artifact. What was a super artifact? The biggest characteristic of a super artifact was that the stronger the owner, the more powerful the weapon would be. She-World understood this concept very well. He raised the 5-foot-long golden battle sword with the shield in his left hand and the battle sword in his right. Like a god, he suddenly retreated at lightning speed. In just an instant, he had moved more than 100 feet away. Once again, he allowed Nian Bing to see him teleport amidst the violent fluctuations of magic elements and energy. As She-World retreated, the shield in his left hand had already disappeared. The flaming dragon took this opportunity to charge forward. Just when everyone thought that She-World would not be able to withstand this violent attack, the shield that had disappeared transformed into an unusual surge of golden light that merged into his battle sword. What did the humans see? They saw the golden lightning. Yes, although the golden lightning only shone brilliantly for a moment, it was enough. The golden lightning attacked in a straight line, just like Halogen's deity slaying Slash. The golden light flashed slightly and disappeared without a trace. However, the clouds in the sky had also completely disappeared. Even Yin Bing and the rest, who were fighting in the sky, had stopped their attacks because of this sword. The domineering aura that was produced when the golden lightning appeared made everyone's heart tremble violently. What kind of strength was that? What kind of violent attack was that? When the golden lightning disappeared, the flaming dragon's huge body stopped moving forward. The huge dark purple body seemed to be very unwilling, but it could no longer move forward. A violent roar that caused the entire lost continent to tremble resounded. An enormous amount of fire elements had gathered and exploded. Prince Rong spat out blood once again. The thousands of magicians under him collapsed to the ground at the same time. Fresh blood flowed out from the corners of their mouths. Their faces were as pale as paper. Not only had they used up all of their magic power, but they had also suffered a huge mental injury. That instant of backlash had caused them to lose the ability to fight. Fortunately, Prince Rong and the experts from the Rong family had blocked a portion of the backlash energy. That was why the magicians were not completely wiped out. She-World looked arrogantly at the army of more than 100,000 humans that had appeared in front of him. At that moment, it was as if he was the only one that existed in this world. His heart was filled with confidence. He had been training hard for so many years. Today, in front of all his enemies and subordinates, he had displayed his strength. This was the strength that a god should possess. She-World raised the long sword in his hand and roared, "Attack!" When the golden lightning appeared, everything was no longer going according to Luo Ro's plan. Her plan could be said to be almost perfect without any flaws. However, She-World had used his own strength to forcefully create a flaw in this perfect plan. It was precisely because of this that the prideful nature of the gods was revealed. They charged forward as fast as they could. Everyone knew that if this group of demigods led the gods to charge into the human camp, then a massacre would occur. In the trenches, all the human warriors had climbed out. The wooden planks that Nian Bing had seen previously were now placed horizontally above the trenches so that the warriors' advance would not be hindered. At the front of the army, the Order of the Fire Dragon and the Order of the Flaming Lion of the Huarong Empire looked coldly at the approaching enemies. As the most elite cavalry in the Yangon continent, even under such circumstances, they did not feel the slightest bit of fear. The long spears in their hand were already placed horizontally. As long as Luo Ro gave the order, they would launch a deadly attack. Although the enemy was powerful, they were confident that they could stop these gods in order to defend their honor. So what if they had to die? Chapter 240. Luo Ro's face was pale, but she didn't panic. Mu Jing and the 7 elders of the Bloodlion cult stood beside her. Their faces were pale, but at this moment, Luo Ro sent out another signal. This time, it wasn't a blood-red flower that soared into the sky, but a pure white light with a faint cold aura. It seemed to bring some coolness to the hot air. At this moment, a large number of blue light spots gathered behind the human army. Among the humans, other than the Rong family's magicians, another group of powerful magicians had made their move. They came from the Ice God Tower. The leader of the Ice God Tower was the new Ice Goddess Priestess Bing Ling. But at this moment, Bing Ling was fighting alongside Bing Jie in front of the main gods. Lan Shen was also in that battle. Therefore, the one in charge of the Ice God Tower's attack was Long Ling Ro Nu Long Ling. As Nian Bing's wife, she had always kept a low profile. However, this didn't mean that she was weak. Under Nian Bing's guidance and constant training, Long Ling's improvement was very obvious. Her Heaven's Eye Point had entered the middle stage earlier than Feng Nu and Lan Shen. Her ice magic had also surpassed the 12th level, reaching the level of a god descent magician. Although there was still a certain distance between her and the 13th level, it wasn't that far away. Therefore, she was now the temporary leader of the Ice God Tower. After coming to the Lost Continent, Long Ling learned many things from Bing Ling. Bing Ling was very satisfied with his 3 daughters-in-law. He liked the gentle and quiet Long Ling, and taught her all his understanding of ice magic, including the method of commanding the Ice God Tower's large-scale magic attack. The Ice God Tower's magicians couldn't compare to the Rome family in terms of numbers. However, the Rome family's magicians couldn't compare to them in terms of individual strength. Thus, even though there were only a little over 100 of them, their offensive power was only slightly inferior to the Rome family's. According to Luo Ro's plan, the mages of the Ice God Tower were the backup team for this attack. Whichever side had a problem, they would help that side. Luo Ro had no choice but to take out her final assassin's sword. Otherwise, it would be too late. Once the enemy rushed over and mixed with the warriors, the advantage of the mages would completely disappear. Shi Jie watched as his army charged forward. There was a look of satisfaction in his eyes. He knew that other than the powerhouses in the air, the other party's main means of attack should come from the mages. Only those mages could pose a threat to his subordinates. Now, those mages should have lost their ability to use magic. All they had to do was rush over. Although there were many enemies, his subordinates were all gods. Although most of them were servants of gods, they were enough to deal a devastating blow to the enemy. Since the Rangoon continent dared to come here to stop him, then he would destroy their elites in one fell swoop. This would save the Rangoon continent a lot of trouble in the future. It wasn't that Shi Jie didn't want to rush over with his subordinates. Although he appeared to be in a good position, only he knew that it wasn't easy for him to resist the flaming dragon. After all, that enormous fire energy was condensed by thousands of magicians. How could it be extinguished so easily? He had used all his strength in a last attack just now. Only then did he manage to break the enemy's attack. The ground had completely cracked from the sudden explosion. At least 2/3 of the surrounding hills had been flattened by the explosion. Shi Jie's body had also suffered a certain degree of injury. He had always cherished his body. Feeling the hot airflow in his body and the weakened combat energy, he floated in the air and commanded his subordinates while slowly regaining his breath. At this moment, Shi Jie saw a large area of condensed blue light spots. They weren't affected by the fire magic just now. The magical elements in the air seemed normal. Judging from the intensity of the blue light spots, this was obviously another large-scale magic. Shi Jie's expression changed. From the information that Xiaoyu brought back, he didn't know that there were so many powerful existences in the human world. Looking at the ice magic that was gradually taking shape, he had no choice but to stop the recovery of his body and fly forward. At this moment, he also understood that every death of one of his subordinates would reduce the strength of the army of gods. Therefore, he had to protect his subordinates as much as possible. As Shi Jie rushed out, he suddenly had a feeling of uneasiness. This was because he suddenly remembered that there seemed to be a very powerful force in his army of gods that hadn't made a move yet. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind. His eyes revealed a strong sense of anger. However, at this moment, he no longer had the ability to save his subordinates. Yes, when the magicians of the Ice God Tower launched their attack, the dragons at the rear, under the leadership of the dragon god, attacked the gods from the rear. From the time they were ambushed until now, only a short 10 minutes had passed. In these 10 minutes, the gods had been attacked by concentrated long-range firepower sneak attacks by Nian Bing and other powerful human beings, and bombardment by super magic. Although the 7 Dragon Kings were helping Nian Bing, the gods didn't have much time to think. Therefore, even though Shi Jie thought about the possible changes that the dragons might cause, he still had to face the magic attacks in front of him after weighing the pros and cons. The dragon god had been waiting for an opportunity. Originally, when Nian Bing and the rest intercepted the lords of gods, he wanted to make a move. Others might not know Shi Jie's strength, but he was very clear about it. However, when Shi Jie suddenly appeared below him, he had no choice but to dispel this thought. Under those circumstances, if he attacked Shi Jie, it was very likely that he would trigger his magic and be attacked by the powerful flame dragons. Therefore, he could only wait. Now, when Shi Jie rushed out and prepared to welcome the arrival of the ice magic, it was undoubtedly the best opportunity. Under the leadership of the dragon god, dozens of dragons pounced on the gods at the rear. At this moment, all the demigod experts among the gods were at the forefront. They had even forgotten that there were still dragons behind them. After all, the dragon god was also an expert at the level of a lord of gods. Although the lethality of the dragons he led was not as strong as Nian Bing and the other experts who attacked at the same time, it was still a surprise attack. Moreover, they were facing divine servants, so it was still very troublesome for the gods. Moreover, at this moment, a petite figure was sitting on the back of a giant dragon. The demonic beast that had disappeared earlier appeared once again. When the lords of gods above them reacted, Nian Bing led the experts of the Yangon continent to activate the spatial magic scroll. Only Kitty chose a different direction from them. She was behind all the gods with the dragons covering her. No one had discovered her. At this moment, it was the perfect opportunity to beat a drowning dog. How could she not appear? Fox Nana's large-scale support ability was activated once again. This time, not only did the demonic beast produce a super strong attack under the strong stimulation, but even the dragons were affected. The thick stench caused the dragons to enter a state similar to berserk. This state was something that the dragons themselves did not expect. However, the increase in attack power was unusually obvious. Nana shook the spikes on her, and lay on the back of the 9-tailed dragon, little stutterer. She had used all her strength to release this super stinky support magic, but she was now very weak. However, her obscene gaze seemed to be very satisfied with her masterpiece. After all, so many dragons had become the attack power of her support magic. If the dragon god had not reacted quickly, she was afraid that she would have been contaminated with the stench. Kitty sat on the back of the 9-tailed dragon, little stutterer, and used her spiritual power to command these giant demonic beasts during the battle. Although Little Stutterer was the strongest one, he rarely participated in the early stages because his main task was to protect Kitty from harm. After all, other than her spiritual magic, Kitty's body was too weak. The faint blue light spots condensed into a huge ice lotus. Back then, Xiaoyu, who was still a lord of gods, had used all her strength to split open the ice lotus, but she had also been injured. Otherwise, she would not have chosen to explode her acupoints when facing Yinbing. Now it was the Shi realm who had to face this ice lotus. The ice lotus appeared when all the gods were 500 feet away from the human warriors, blocking the entire area from the front. The blue light that was filled with cold air and energy surged out, forming a thick layer of ice on the ground. Shi realm's eyes emitted a cold glint. Of course, he knew that he had to deal with this magic as soon as possible so that he could deal with the dragons. If it was under normal circumstances, the dragon god would naturally not be a threat to him. However, it was different now. The huge flaming dragon from before had already consumed a lot of his energy. The dragon god's strength was around the middle of the lords of gods, but he had the strong body of a dragon and his dragon language magic. Even if Shi realm wanted to kill him, it would not be an easy task. Therefore, he was now somewhat anxious. The dragon god was also racing against time. The lords of gods and god-level masters in the sky were already being held back by Nian Bing and the rest. Before the Shi realm returned to help, it was the best time to attack these gods. Ever since the dragons settled down in the mainland of gods, the dragon god, had never had a good impression of these gods. Especially after the great war of the divine remains, he was even more disappointed in these gods. If it were not for the constraints of the lords of God's strength, he would have led his people and left long ago. Now, it was obviously the best opportunity. Back then, the She realm had once suggested to let the dragons become the mounts of the powerful gods. However, the dragon god vetoed the idea. He would rather the dragons be destroyed than let his people become the mounts of these gods. Otherwise, once the contract was signed, it would be impossible to reverse it. Although the lifespan of the gods was not endless, the powerful gods had the opportunity to live as long as the dragons. Once they became their mounts, would they not be enslaved for life? Dragon language magic exploded continuously amidst the dragon god's deep dragon roar. The gods in front were attracted by the huge ice flower. Of course, they hoped to see the She realm show their might once again and completely destroy the opponent's magic. Therefore, it was already too late when they discovered the sneak attack from the dragons behind them. This caused the dragons to not attack in human form like the 7 dragon kings. They completely relied on their physical bodies and crazy dragon breath to launch their strongest attack. Most of the gods did not know that the 7 handsome men and women who had launched the sneak attack were actually the Dragon King's incarnations. After all, the Dragon Kings had always been in the mainland of Yangon and were not familiar with this place. Therefore, apart from the She realm who had woken up, all the gods did not expect such a huge force to suddenly appear behind them. Therefore, the divine servants were unlucky. The dragons were like scythes that continuously reaped their lives. When the divine servants finally realized that something was wrong and rose up to resist, 700 to 800 of them had already died in the sudden attack of the dragons. This number was still increasing. After all, although the divine servants had organized to resist the attack of the dragons, the difference in strength was so obvious. If it were not for the protective equipment made of special minerals on their bodies, perhaps the dragons' massacre would have been even easier. After all, they were under the leadership of a king god. The difference between a king god and a divine servant was too great. Almost every movement and magic of the dragon god could take the lives of at least a few to a dozen divine servants. The She realm's huge golden blade was raised again. The ice lotus only appeared for a moment before it suffered the same fate as the flaming dragon. It was also struck by golden lightning, but the ice lotus, which was not as strong as the flaming dragon, was almost instantly shattered. However, this time, the Ice God Tower was much luckier than the mages of the Roan family. The backlash they suffered was much smaller. It was not that She realm was being merciful, but the attack power of the golden lightning he released this time was much weaker. After the golden light flashed, She realm flew back without any pause to meet the dragon god and the dragons who were in the midst of a massacre. Under his orders, the gods were divided into 2 groups. One group was led by the demigods. About 2,000 people rushed toward the warriors of the Rangoon mainland. More of them rushed back to encircle and annihilate the elites of the dragons. After all, they had to settle the internal conflict before they could invade the external conflict. The current situation was the last thing She realm wanted to see. Although the gods were powerful, the feeling of being attacked from the front and back was definitely not easy. She realm's eyes were fixed on the dragon god. His powerful aura was locked onto the gigantic dragon that was more than 10 feet long. Its entire body was shining with golden red light. She realm's eyes were filled with fury. Why? Why did you choose to be sentenced to death? The dragon god looked at him coldly. We dragons have never truly belonged to the Quake mainland. There's no such thing as betrayal. She realm, you may have always thought that the gods are the most powerful, but there's one thing I have to tell you. Nothing is absolute in this world. The Rangoon mainland is the last pure land in our world. I can't watch it be destroyed in the hands of selfish fellows like you. The dragons will always stand on the side of justice. Back then, it was because I was too hesitant that the civilization of the Lost Continent was destroyed. However, I will never let the same situation happen again. You will never understand my thoughts in the She world. The golden light continued to shine on the super artifact long sword. A layer of golden armor gradually condensed on She-Realm's body. The fury in his eyes subsided and was replaced by an icy coldness that was filled with the aura of death. He did not look at the dragons who continued to massacre the gods. He knew that only by killing the dragon god in front of him could he stop the massacre of the dragons below. However, killing a king god was easier said than done. Therefore, at this moment, he had already displayed his full strength. She-Realm's body suddenly became illusory. He did not even say another word to the dragon god before he launched his attack. Faint golden phantoms appeared in every corner of the dragon god's body. The golden sharp blade carried an incomparably powerful fighting aura as it launched a deadly attack on the dragon god. The dragon god appeared to be very calm. His gaze did not chase after the faint golden phantoms. A layer of golden red light instantly erupted from the dragon god's body. It formed a halo that surged into the surroundings. The dragon god did not have the Tian Yen acupoint or the listening cloud acupoint to distinguish the direction of the enemy's attack. The only thing he could do was to attack indiscriminately. He released his powerful dragon aura in every direction of his body. Only in this way could he temporarily block She-Realm's attack. When the dragon god and She-Realm clashed, the battle in the sky had also entered a white-hot state. The strength of the four kings had exceeded Nian Bing's expectations. He was surprised to find that the four expressionless kings were all stronger than Xia Yu and Gulong. Moreover, although their fighting style was simple, the strength of their attacks was extremely difficult to defend against. Obviously, they all possessed the ultimate Emperor acupoint. In addition to the 18 god-level experts, their combined attack was too powerful. Now, the powerhouses on Nian Bing's side had thrown themselves into the attack with all their might. This included the 7 Sword Souls and Oscar. They launched wave after wave of attacks in a frenzy. They were suppressing their opponents from a front. However, under the leadership of the four kings, the gods built a huge barrier. No matter which angle Nian Bing and the others attacked from, they would be blocked. The 7 Dragon Kings' draconic magic constantly exploded into balls of colorful light in the sky. Unfortunately, their magic could not destroy the barrier. Nian Bing and Bingling were at the back. As Bingling had the mid-stage ultimate Emperor acupoint, she had no problem protecting herself as long as it was not a full-force attack from the kings. However, this was not the case for Bingling. Among the powerhouses on the Yangon side, she was the weakest. Nian Bing had to split his attention to protect his mother. He was afraid that something would happen to her. This was a helpless action, but it was also something he had to do. Halogen had become the sharpest blade on the Yangon side. With his strength and the god-slaying axe's tyrannical attack, he could often disperse the king's ultimate Emperor acupoint's Do Qi when he faced the kings. The last time he faced the kings, Halogen had suffered heavy injuries. Although he had used all his strength, he was still not a match for the kings. However, he was different now. These days, he had been training hard and was surprised to discover the secret of the god-slaying axe. After his body had merged with the axe's soul, his strength had increased tremendously. This was also why Nian Bin said that he had reached level 14. If it was a one-on-one battle, Halogen, who had just reached level 14, would not be a match for any of the kings. However, he did not have to worry about his surroundings now. He only needed to use all his strength to attack. Garamandes roared, and the red light dimmed significantly. He clashed head-on with a god-tier expert. Although he had torn his opponent's arms apart, he had also received a solid kick. This kick landed right on his chest. If it were not for the dragon's strong defense, this kick would have taken the life of the Dragon King. Even so, Garamandes was still heavily injured and temporarily left the battle. The 7 Dragon Kings had been working together for many years. With one suddenly gone, their strength was weakened. Although Kageyo's used his battle prowess close to level 14 and cooperated with Emperor Kurobutsu to block most of the enemy's attacks, the Yangon side gradually fell into a disadvantageous position. Nian Bing knew that it was time for him to launch that kind of attack. Although Emperor Kurobutsu had warned him not to use spiritual attacks unless it was absolutely necessary, or else it would easily backfire. However, at this moment, if he did not do anything, the powerhouses on his side would easily be dealt a fatal blow. Nian Bing did not want to see anyone on his side get hurt. These were all his family and friends. Therefore, standing beside his mother, he still fully released the sky domain. His eyes quietly turned golden, and his spiritual fluctuations began to become stronger around his body. The four main gods brought up four golden lights like swimming dragons. Not only did they block Emperor Kurobutsu's attacks, but they also blocked the attacks of Emperor Kurobutsu. At the same time, they also blocked the attacks of the Dark Dragon King, Kagios, and Halogen. At the same time, they also blocked part of the attacks of the Sword Souls and several other Dragon Kings. If it were not for Bing, Jie, beside Nian Bing, if the two ice spirits' continuous release of powerful ice-type magic had caused them to be apprehensive, their murderous intent would have been ignited long ago. At this moment, the four main gods felt Nian Bing's spiritual fluctuations at the same time. A tall, burly sovereign with snow-white hair suddenly called out, "Be careful of spiritual attacks. Fortify your heart." With his warning, all the god-level powerhouses shuddered at the same time. At this moment, Nian Bing's spiritual attack appeared. A faint golden light rose into the sky like a long arrow. Immediately after, it turned into a faint shadow and shot toward one of the god-level powerhouses. With the abilities of Nian Bing's current acupuncture points, his physical spiritual attack, coupled with the power of the extreme Emperor Acupoint, would be a headache even for the Shi world. He was no longer the Nian Bing who killed lizards on the godly mainland. Under the full lockdown of the sky, Acupoint, as long as he locked onto his target, his physical spiritual attack would definitely hit the target. The golden light flashed and disappeared without even a scream. That god-level powerhouse's head burst into a ball of bloody light, and he was instantly killed. At the same time, Nian Bing's body swayed as a wave of dizziness swept through his mind. With the main god's warning, every god-level powerhouse strengthened their spiritual power. Although Nian Bing's spiritual power was much stronger than theirs, it was impossible to forcefully attack without paying a price. The death of a god-level powerhouse reduced the pressure on the powerhouses of the Sunshine Mainland. However, the reduction in pressure only lasted for a moment. The attacks of the four main gods suddenly became stronger. Among them, two of the main gods suddenly increased their speed, and their bodies shot toward the crowd like phantoms. The remaining 6 Dragon King hurriedly activated their draconic magic. They barely managed to block them by exhausting more of their draconic power with a large-scale attack. On the other hand, the bodies of the other 2 main gods emitted a pure milky white light, greatly increasing the defensive power of the god-level powerhouses. For a moment, they actually managed to block the all-out attack of the 2 ice mages who worked together with Halogen and Blade Soul. Nian Bing took a deep breath. Of course, he knew what this was. It was the ultimate Earth Spirit Point and the ultimate Square Armor Point. After all, the main gods were still the main gods. The movements of the main gods obviously gave the god-level powerhouses a stronger desire to attack. The various colors of light became monotonous, and they all activated the abilities of their acupuncture points. All of a sudden, their attacks and defenses became even stronger. Nian Bing floated in the air. The auxiliary ability of the sky's domain was strengthened once again. At the same time, his physical spiritual power attack was launched again. In order to reverse the situation, he attacked 2 god-level powerhouses this time. Nian Bing was very clear that with his physical spiritual power, he only had the strength to destroy one main god. But after destroying any one of the main gods in front of him, his spiritual power would be greatly weakened. If he wanted to destroy any other main god, he was afraid that he would have to face an unbearable pressure. At that time, without the assistance of the sky's domain, the remaining 2 main gods would be powerhouses on his side. Only under the effect of the sky's domain, Halogen, Emperor Kurobutsu, and Kagorosis could resist the other party's attacks. Thus, after weighing the pros and cons, he could only use his physical spiritual power to attack those god-level powerhouses on the premise of maintaining the sky's domain. 2 faint golden lights flashed past, and then two blood-red lights exploded. The sky's eye domain clearly weakened for a moment before returning to normal. Nian Bing's body would have fallen from the sky if not for his mother's support. His mind instantly went blank. If not for his firm willpower supporting him, the sky's eye domain would have stopped being released. The backlash from attacking two god-level powerhouses at the same time was even stronger. He knew that if he wanted to continue maintaining the sky's eye domain, he definitely couldn't use his physical spiritual power attacks anymore. The god-level powerhouses naturally saw Nian Bing's situation, but at this time, they still felt a certain amount of panic. After all, 3 instant kills. 3 god-level powerhouses had lost their lives just like that, and this created a huge pressure in their hearts. Apart from the 4 main gods, the other god-level powerhouses were hesitating in their hearts. Would they become that guy's next target? The hesitation in their hearts caused their attacks to weaken a little. At this time, the 6 Dragon King and Halogen were all injured, and the light on the 7 Sword Souls had dimmed significantly. Only Nian Bing's Sky's Eye Domain's assistance had not weakened. On the other hand, although the god-level powerhouses were still in a balanced state, Nian Bing's side had lost everyone's strength, and they had lost the lives of their god-level powerhouses. Every time that faint golden light flashed, a life would be taken away. They were already panicking in their hearts. 3 god-level powerhouses had died, and one of them had lost the ability to attack because his arms were destroyed by Garamandes. Although he was still alive, he had already left the battlefield. It would be difficult for him to become a god-level powerhouse in the future, let alone today. The battle in the sky became more and more tragic, and the battle between the known god and Shi Jie on the ground was even more brutal. There were dozens of wounds on the dragon god's body that were so deep that his bones could be seen. Although his dragon body's defense was strong and he had the protection of the dragon power, it was difficult for him to truly resist Shi Jie's super artifact golden sword. The battle between them was still in the same state as before. The dragon god continued to release his draconic magic and draconic aura, attacking in all directions at the same time. Shi Jie's body remained in an illusory state, and he relied on his speed to find a flaw in the dragon god's all-around attack. Although he had the absolute upper hand, the dragon god's body that was constantly flying forward and releasing draconic magic at full force had caused the god-level powerhouses below to suffer a lot of losses. In addition to the crazy attacks from Kitty and the giant dragons, the number of god-level powerhouses was gradually increasing. What happened to the 2,000 god-level powerhouses that had rushed towards the human warriors? They had rushed in. Yes, they had already rushed into the human warriors' camp. However, it was not just the 2,000 god-level powerhouses that had rushed in. Only 1,200 god-level powerhouses had managed to rush into the human camp. This was because they had been blocked by the god-killing crossbows before they had rushed in. After the god-killing crossbows had been withdrawn, they had directly entered the human army. Seeing the god-level powerhouses charging towards them, the god-killing crossbows released a huge amount of energy. Chapter 2:41. If it weren't for the demigod experts at the front, the losses of the gods would have been even greater. Of course, the death of nearly 1,000 gods wasn't just caused by the god-killing crossbows. Within a certain distance, the gods were completely scattered, no longer giving the god-killing crossbows the opportunity to unleash their full power. At this moment, the 2 strongest knight regiments of the Huarong Empire charged out of the battle formation with the flames of honor burning in their hearts. The strength of the gods was once again displayed in front of everyone. The Order of the Fire Dragon. Every knight was carefully selected. They had their own dragon spears and their own dragon mounts. They were the strongest Rangoon cavalry outside of the Order of the Flaming Lion. What was their fate now? It was a simple word: death. The 2 knight regiments had only launched a single charge, but the price they paid was total annihilation. Under the leadership of over 100 demigod experts, the knights didn't have much of a chance. They could only rely on the violent charge to take away the lives of hundreds of gods before disappearing from this barren land forever. The most outstanding knight regiments of the Huarong Empire, the one that the Huarong Empire spent countless efforts to create, were destroyed just like that. Prince Roan, who had just recovered some of his vitality, couldn't help but vomit blood when he saw this scene. He fainted. Nearly 1,000 gods were killed out of the 2,000 gods. Most of them died under the dual attacks of the god-killing crossbows. The results of these two elite knight regiments were pitifully small. At this moment, the human warriors all raised their weapons. None of them retreated. They all thought of their families. If these ferocious gods went to the Rangoon continent, what would happen? What kind of scene would that be? Therefore, although they knew that they would be courting death, they still raised their weapons. They launched a suicidal resistance against the gods. At this moment, the individual strength of the gods was already on display. Although there were only 1,200 gods, what they brought was the call of the god of death. The number of human warriors decreased sharply. In the beginning of the battle, the gods didn't suffer any losses. Those demigod-level experts were almost invincible. Every time they attacked, they could easily take the lives of over a dozen human warriors. At this point, their eyes had already turned red from the killing. The resentment from being suppressed by magic and crossbows was completely released. In their hearts, only fresh blood could release the resentment in their hearts. However, the arrogance of the gods did not last for long. The situation went from one-sided to a stalemate, because the elites of the Blood Lion sect appeared. 2,000 Blood Lion cult elites, 500 Blood Guards, and 100 Ice Moon Hall experts, led by the 7 elders and 5 Hall masters of the Blood Lion cult, appeared in the midst of the Rangoon warriors surrounding the godly beings. Their appearance immediately slowed down the rate at which the human soldiers were being slaughtered, and the number of deities also began to decrease. Among them, the ones who had the most obvious effect were not the swordsman-level experts. This was because, including the 7 elders of the Bloodline cult, these experts were facing demigod-level experts who were stronger than them. They used their lives to barely resist the attacks of their opponents. On the other hand, the ones who began to reap the lives of the enemies were the Blood Guards. Yes, the 500 Blood Guards who grew up in iron and blood. The Blood Guards never wore armor. They always wore dark red warrior robes, just like their weapons, which were always sharp swords. Their swords not only had strong, penetrating power, but also had long-distance poison. Their addition was a nightmare for the gods. Under the sneak attacks of the Blood Guards, the casualties of the divine servants of the gods kept increasing. In the eyes of the Blood Guards, in order to achieve their goals, they could use any means. Often, when a human warrior was killed by a divine servant, the Blood Guards would quietly stab out from under the human warrior's armpit with all their strength. Even if their own bodies were pierced by the divine servant's weapons, their attacks would not stop for a moment. What the Blood Guards brought was a kind of spirit. They did not care about their own lives at all. As long as they were still breathing, their attacks would not stop. Although the Order of the Fire Dragon and the Order of the Flaming Lion were experts in war and had strong charging power, in a fight against experts, their charging power was not of much use. In a previous battle, it was precisely because the demigod-level experts at the forefront completely restrained their explosive charging power that they were completely wiped out. However, the Blood Guard are different. They were the most elite forces of the Blood Lion cult. In previous battles, their goal was to assassinate experts who were stronger than them. Therefore, their tactics were the most effective against these gods. The Blood Guards were like cunning, poisonous snakes, always hiding in the dark corners. However, when they suddenly attacked, they would always gain something. What they gained was the lives of their enemies. In order to gain something, they sometimes had to pay with their own lives. With the addition of the Blood Guards, the battle became a stalemate. The hundreds of thousands of soldiers from the Rangoon continent surrounded the remaining 1,000 gods and killed them. Although they could not cause much damage to the gods, their firm belief in protecting the Rangoon continent made them fearless in the face of these powerful gods. If there were not hundreds of demigod-level experts among the gods, they would have been slaughtered long ago. However, their absolute strength did not allow the Rangoon continent to gain any advantage. Every time they killed a god, they had to pay with a few or even a few dozen or even hundreds of lives. This was the result of the chaotic battle. The battle was still in a stalemate, and there were casualties on 3 sides. The casualties in the air were obviously the least. After Nian Bing's spiritual power was greatly weakened, both sides could only injure each other, but not kill each other. No one could say for sure which side the decisive battle would be, but it could be said that the outcome of any battle would affect the overall situation. Nearly 6,000 deities were slaughtered by the dragons, and their numbers were greatly reduced. Without the help of a demigod-level expert, they had almost no chance against the dragons. The strong defense of the dragons prevented them from being fatally injured. However, whether it was their breath or their tyrannical bodies, they were nightmares for the gods in front of them. The battle had become chaotic. On Luo Ro's side, a low chant sounded, but it was not loud. It was completely covered by the sounds of the battlefield. However, there were less than 1,000 gods left here, but they did not know that it was this inconspicuous chant that decided their fate. A layer of green fog filled the air, covering the Rangoon continent's army and the gods. Both sides were shocked. The gods cautiously retreated a little, but they soon realized. This green fog, which was filled with an evil aura, did not have any effect on them. After a few probing attacks, they revealed their ferocious side. They once again entered the battlefield and continued their slaughter. However, they soon realized that something was not right. Broken corpses gradually stood up from the ground. There were the dead order of the fire dragon and order of the flaming lion, as well as the dead soldiers and blood guards of the other countries in Rangoon continent. Their auras became abnormally cold, and some of them even had blood dripping from their bodies. The evil aura filled the entire battlefield. All of the human warriors quickly retreated under Luo Ro's orders, while the warriors who stood up once again charged forward. Facing the attacks of the gods, they did not feel pain at all. The method they used was to perish together with the enemy. Unless their bodies were completely destroyed, they would bite their opponents even if only their heads were left. Their combat strength increased instantly. Not only were the gods affected physically, but their hearts were also trembling at the same time. The ones who attacked them were actually their own companions. What was this? What were these things? Under the influence of the green fog, the balance of the battle on Luo Ro's side began to tilt. Yu Yu stood in the middle of the crowd with a pale face. She was not tall, and apart from Ping Chao, who was guarding her, even the soldiers on Rangoon continent did not know that everything in front of them was caused by this little girl's strength. The green fog was released by Yu Yu. How she wished she did not have to use this magic. However, reality proved that she still had to use it, because enough people had already died. This is necromancy magic. We have to find the necromancer. A demigod god shouted in fear. They could easily kill human soldiers, but it would not be easy to tear them into pieces. Moreover, this undead army numbered in the tens of thousands. These tens of thousands of people had died at their hands, but now they had become their enemies. Monstrous resentment continued to rise. Under the assault of the undead army who did not know what death was, the gods began to retreat. They were already terrified. Luo Ro raised her hand again. She was holding the token that Nian Bing had given her. Of the 2,000 elites that Nian Bing had given her, less than 1,500 were left. Of the 500 blood guards, only 200 were still alive. Although the casualties were heavy, the deaths of the blood guards were something to be proud of, because every blood guard had killed at least one god, a god whose strength was on par with them. Luo Ro closed her eyes. Tears flowed down her cheeks and dripped on the ground. She gave the order, "God, punishing arrows, target the front. Fire and ice explode. Shoot." There were a total of 200 god-killing crossbows. Because of the casualties, there were only about 100 crossbows left. The warriors of the Bloodline cult only knew how to carry out orders, even if the targets of their god-killing crossbows were their dead brothers. The giant crossbows were pulled back, and the super crossbows flashed red and blue. With a wave of Luo Ro's hand, dozens of forbidden-level crossbows exploded with the power they should have. With the scopes designed by Dwarf King Yueluan, none of the arrows missed. They completed their mission. The light of the magic exploded in the center of the remaining hundreds of gods and tens of thousands of undead warriors. The intense power of the forbidden level spell instantly created an empty space. The remaining hundreds of gods were completely surrounded by the undead warriors. With such an intense magic suddenly exploding from their heads, they finally could not resist. After another few hundred corpses, only a few powerful demigod gods managed to escape the battlefield. There were only about 100 of them. In this battle, they had lost another 2,000 elite deities. Under the special care of the warriors of the Bloodline sect, only the warriors in the innermost circle were affected by the outburst of the forbidden level spell. There were still more than 20,000 undead warriors left. Without any hesitation, under the guidance of the green fog, they rushed toward the large group of gods who were fighting the dragons. Once the suicidal attack started, it would not stop until all the undead warriors had lost their lives. The more powerful the undead warriors were when they were alive, the more powerful they would be after turning into undead. Among these undead warriors, there were now more than 1,000 undead gods. Under the cover of the green weapons, they charged towards the remaining undead gods. At this moment, a dragon's roar was suddenly heard. The roar was filled with anger and unwillingness. The dragon god's huge body slowly fell, and there was a long golden blade in his heart. Shijie stood in front of the dragon god. His chest was heaving up and down as he breathed in the air that was filled with blood. At this moment, his 7 orifices were bleeding at the same time. His body was trembling slightly. The clothes on his body were no longer intact, revealing his steel-like muscles. Looking at the dragon god's eyes that were filled with anger, he said hatefully, "Do you regret it?" The dragon god looked at him with a deathly gaze. "No, I do not regret it. This is the only way for us dragons to return to the light. Shijie, you will not succeed. The human warriors will completely destroy you despicable fellows from the continent of gods." Shijie took a deep look at the dragon god. Under his continuous attacks, even the dragon god who possessed the Dragon God Heart Sutra was covered in wounds. His internal organs had also been shattered by his own violent do chi. However, his eyes were firm. Yes, he did not regret his actions. Shijie felt a sense of respect for the dragon god whom he had been with for tens of thousands of years. He pulled out his golden blade and allowed the dragon god's blood to splatter all over his body. He could not bear to destroy the dragon god's body anymore. 7 sorrowful dragon roars were suddenly heard. The 7 dragon king in the air, including the severely injured Garamandes, attacked the opponents in front of them without any regard for their lives. Amidst their roars, all the dragons let out frenzied cries. The intensity of their attacks doubled in an instant. These dragons were like the undead warriors. They no longer cared about the damage they would receive and launched an abnormally crazy attack. They only had one goal, which was to charge toward the dragon god. Shijie simply scanned the scene and understood what was going on. A golden blade radiance slashed out. The blade radiance expanded in the air and went straight for the undead warriors. A violent explosion caused a rain of blood to fall. The tens of thousands of undead warriors at the front were crushed by this domineering attack. Shijie looked hatefully at the human army in the distance and roared unwillingly, "Retreat!" If the army of gods really wanted to retreat, no one could stop them, especially when Shijie was showing his might. However, could the dragons make them retreat? Seeing that the dragon god had suffered a fatal injury, the dragons who had ambushed the gods from behind went crazy. They did not care if they could hurt Shijie and launched a suicidal attack on him. When the 6th dragon died under Shijie's golden blade, a dying dragon roar was heard. "Let them go." Blood kept flowing out from under the scales of the dragon god. However, his voice was very stable. He took a deep look at Shijie and gave his last order to his people. The dragons went crazy because of the dragon god. They also disappeared because of the dragon god. They could not bear to reject their king's last order. All the dragons flew up, including Little Stutterer, who was carrying Kitty. Little Stutterer flapped his golden dragon wings and rose into the sky with Kitty on his back. All the demonic beasts were recalled by Kitty at this moment. In the previous battle, although the demonic beasts had unleashed a very powerful killing power, The 9-melon poisonous spider was already dead. After all, his body was relatively weaker. The other demonic beasts had also suffered different degrees of injuries. The combat energy of the gods was not as simple as it seemed. The main gods who were fighting Nian Bing and the others immediately launched a fierce attack after receiving Shi Jie's order. However, what shocked them was that the 7 dragon kings in front of them did not seem to care about his own life. He actually cooperated with the others to block their attacks. They only managed to escape from the battlefield after sparing the life of another god-ranked expert. After meeting up with the Shi Jie below, they quickly escaped. The deities came quickly and left quickly. In just a short while, the remaining 4,000 deities had all retreated, leaving behind a ground full of blood and corpses. The battlefield fell into silence. Garamandes spat out another mouthful of blood, but he did not stop and rushed down. The 7 dragon kings followed after him as he came to his father's side. Nian Bing and all the experts from the Rangoon mainland surrounded the dragon god's mountain-like body. Luo Ro turned around from afar. She could not bear to watch this scene and ordered the generals under her to begin integrating the army from the Rangoon mainland. The dragons also descended from the sky and surrounded the 7 dragon kings. They lowered their proud heads, and their huge bodies prostrated on the ground, using silence to express the sorrow in their hearts. Garamandes stood in front of the dragon god and held his huge forearm. "Father, you must hold on. You will be fine. We dragons still need your leadership." The dragon god's gaze became gentle. He looked at his son in front of him and said, "Garamandes, you are injured." Garamandes shook his head vigorously. He said, "No, I am fine." "Father, you'll be fine too. Demand Teddy, Nian Bing, quickly say my father." As he spoke, 2 rays of golden light had already enveloped the dragon god's body. Under the effect of the strongest light magic, the terrifying wounds on the dragon god's body no longer bled. The dragon god shook his head. He no longer had the strength to stand up. Looking at the dragon king, Nian Bing, and the others in front of him, he sighed softly and said, "Don't waste your energy. We dragons are different from humans. We have strong magic resistance and extremely high defense. My internal organs are all damaged. Now it is my dragon soul that is supporting me that I can still talk to you. You should all understand that healing magic has no effect on me." No. Absolutely not. "Father, Nian Bing's magic is very strong. He will definitely be able to cure you." Garamandes roared frantically. Although Nian Bing's mental strength was now very weak, he was still doing his best to perform the water and light magic, and the life orb on his chest was also releasing the aura of life without hesitation. However, he soon discovered that his healing magic had no effect on the dragon god, just as the dragon god had said. The vitality of the dragon god was already very strong, but now the vitality of the dragon god was rapidly depleting. No matter how he replenished it, it was impossible to slow down the speed of depleting. The dragon god was like a bag full of holes that could no longer be repaired. Although Nian Bing's magic was strong, he was not a god. He knew that even if Cao was here now, he could not save the dragon god's life. "Well, Garamandes, don't make things difficult for Nian Bing anymore. He is also very weak now. Stop the treatment. Before I die completely, I have a few words to say to you and Kagarosis." Tears flowed down from Garamandes's face. At that time, when his father valued Kagarosis, he was not sad. When his most beloved demand Teddy chose Kagarosis, he did not shed tears. The position of the dragon god that should have been inherited by him was also given to Kagarosis. He was still himself, as if he was a man of iron who could not cry. But now, he was crying sadly in front of his father who was about to die. His legs went soft. Garamandes knelt in front of the dragon god, holding his father's head tightly, and tears poured out. Kagarosis also walked to the front of the dragon god. Although his expression was calm, his deep black eyes were full of sadness. The dragon god had given him too much. In his heart, the elder he respected the most was the dragon god in front of him. It was the dragon god who taught him how to become an excellent dragon, how to become the pride of his people. He knew that he would never be able to repay the dragon god's kindness. Tears also flowed down from the cold and dark eyes of the Dragon King. Looking at the huge golden-red eyes of the Dragon God, he said solemnly, "Lord Dragon God, if you have any orders, just say it." The Dragon God laughed. At this time, he actually laughed. "You know, Kagorosis, when I chose you, I felt it was a little risky. I'm not talking about choosing you to be the successor of the Dragon God, but the moment when I let you return to being a dragon. After all, your held black dragons have done so many wrong things. But now, I can proudly say it in front of my people. My choice was not wrong. After I die, the dragons will be handed over to you. I believe that under your leadership, our dragons will be more prosperous. After I led the warriors of our clan to this continent, the women and children of our clan have also set off. Under my orders, they will bypass the battlefield and meet up with you from the rear. You need to find a suitable place to settle down our clan and let us dragons live in a suitable environment. Kagorosis, I'll leave this to you." Lord Dragon God, Kagorosis's voice choked, and he couldn't say what was in his heart. The Dragon God said, "Well, you are all ready? In order to be the successor of my throne, you must be strong in front of our people. Their fate is in your hands. Believe me and believe in yourself. You must be a qualified dragon god. Oh, by the way, there is also your child Oscar. Kaka is very good, and his achievements will inevitably be above yours in the future. I'm glad that I didn't punish him at that time. My opinion remains unchanged. When you are old, he will inherit the throne of the dragon god. Grandpa Dragon God, I'm here." Oscar transformed into his human form and flew in front of the dragon god and knelt down beside his father. During the days when Yinbing was in the land of God, Oscar had been learning from the dragon god. The dragon god gave him a lot of things to let him grow faster. Seeing the dragon god become like this, his heart was full of sadness and reluctance. But he knew that there was no possibility of the dragon god being cured because his soul was connected to Yinbing. The dragon god looked at Oscar with a smile and said, "Cultivate well." At that time, the destruction of your body was not a bad thing. It facilitated you and Yinbing to be together. Yinbing is the most outstanding human I've ever seen. I'm sure he won't bury you if you become his companion. One day in the future, you will be as outstanding as your father and become the leader of our dragons. Kagorosis wiped the tears on his face, stood up, pressed his right hand on his forehead, and solemnly said, "I, the Dark Dragon King Kagorosis, swear in the name of the Dragon God that for the prosperity of the dragons, I will contribute all my strength until the end of my life." The Dragon God also said in a solemn voice, "I, in the name of the former Dragon God, grant you the honor of inheriting the throne of the Dragon God. The ancestors will be with you, and the dragons will always look at the light under your leadership." A faint golden-red radiance lit up on the Dragon God's forehead, and a small golden crystal floated out and fell between Kagorosis's eyebrows. The faint golden radiance instantly became intense, and when the radiance converged, the golden crystal had already disappeared. Kagorosis's body exuded the aura of a ruler. After inheriting the dragon god's crystal soul, he had now become a true dragon god. The dragon god who released the golden crystal looked even weaker. After taking a deep look at Kagorosis, his gaze fell on his crying son. "Garamandes, you have to learn from Kagorosis. I can see that you have now become a real man, a man of our dragons. Our fire dragons will still be led by you in the future. Child, can you tell me, do you still hate me?" Garamandes took a deep look at his father and said, "No, I don't blame you anymore. When I really grew up, I already understood your difficulties. You didn't make a mistake in choosing Kagorosis. He is more suitable to be the successor of the dragon god than I am. He is stronger than me in all aspects. It's just that I have always been unwilling to admit it due to my own dignity." "Father, The dragon god interrupted him. "Well, I understand what you mean. In fact, to me, you and Kagorosis are both my children. In terms of talent, you are not much worse than him. But do you know why I've always been better to Kagorosis than to you?" Garamandes shook his head blankly. The dragon god smiled and said, That's because you still have me, your father, while Kagarosis is an orphan. You should know that the hell-black dragons are reclusive by nature. If I don't care about him a little more and don't treat him as my own child, how can he grow up on the right path? I really owe you, but in my heart, you are still the most important. Looking at you now, I'm really gratified. You are indeed my son. I'm also proud of you. Garamandi's tears that had just stopped flowed down again. He threw himself on the dragon god and burst into tears. Yes, he had always treated the dragon god as his own father. Just as the dragon god had said, ever since he returned to the dragons, the dragon god had treated him much better than his own son. How could he forget this kindness? The dragon god looked at his two children gently and sighed deeply. Actually, I knew that today's outcome would happen, but it couldn't be avoided. The she world is indeed too strong. If I didn't accompany him, I'm afraid that today's outcome would have been decided. Therefore, I had to do this. My children, I hope you can understand me. For the dragons and for the Yangon mainland, my sacrifice is worth it. Nian Bing, come here. Chapter 242. Nian Bing strode over to the dragon god. Because he had used a spiritual power to instantly kill a divine expert, and because he had continuously used his most powerful heavenly eye domain, his body was extremely weak. Thus, he could only walk and was unable to teleport to the dragon god's side. Looking at the tall and majestic elder in front of him, Nian Bing wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes. He had not been in contact with the dragon god for a long time, but his life could be said to have been saved by the dragon god. At that time, if the dragon god had not brought him to the continent of gods, he would have been recorded as a zombie. How could he have achieved what he had today? The dragon god looked at Nian Bing and said, "Child, you are very brave. You and your companions bravely met the challenge in the face of such a powerful army of gods on the continent of gods. When I first saw you, I had a premonition that you would become one of the greatest figures in human history. At that time, you used your own life to erupt with powerful magic to save my children. Since then, you have had a close relationship with us dragons. After that, I brought you to the continent of gods. Your continuous growth surprised me. Now, you have truly grown into a hero of the human race. However, there is one thing I must remind you. When facing those gods, you must be very, very careful." Nian Bing nodded firmly and said, "Lord Dragon God, your sacrifice will not be in vain. You have bought us precious time. I will definitely lead the brave warriors of the Yangon continent to keep those abominable bastards out of the Yangon continent forever." The dragon god looked deeply at Nian Bing and said, "If you want to achieve the final victory in this war, you must pay attention to a key point. Do you know what it is?" Nian Bing thought for a moment and said, "Is it the king gods?" Of course he knew. The strength of the sovereigns was also a decisive factor in this war. The dragon god reluctantly shook his huge head. "No, not the king gods, but that king god. He is the king of the king gods who fought with me before, Shijia. Although the other kings are powerful, you still have the power to fight back. However, Shijia is different. Frankly speaking, he has already surpassed the realm of the king gods. This was not only because he had 6 acupoints of the ultimate realm. At the same time, it was also because he had opened all 3 of his extreme emperor acupoints. I once told you that the Huangji acupoint is not the only one. This was also the reason why he could be compared to the heavenly eye acupoint. The 3 extreme emperor acupoints and the other 5 ultimate acupoints allowed him to reach level 15. Otherwise, how could he have withstood so many of your magician's attacks and killed me with his own strength? His strength was simply too strong. If you can't think of a way to destroy him, it's useless even if you kill all the other gods. You must understand that just his strength alone is enough to completely destroy all of you. The numbers were right in front of him. It's impossible to have any advantage at all. 15th level? Hearing this number, Nian Bing's heartbeat suddenly sped up. When she recalled the golden light that Shi Jie had emitted previously and his domineering aura, Nian Bing could not help but become even more curious. Then how should we deal with him? He has 3 extreme emperor acupoints. Is he someone we can fight against? The dragon god said, I don't know. I can't answer this question. Apart from those true gods, I really can't think of any other way to destroy him. However, I can remind you that sometimes the strongest point can also be the weakest point. In today's battle, although he played a huge role and even killed me, he has also injured himself. With his personality, he will not be able to fully recover. Before it fully recovers, it will not launch an all-out attack. However, it will not take more than 10 days. How you prepare will depend on yourselves. Miracles often only appear in front of those who are prepared. I believe that you have the courage and determination to do this. Nian Bing, you will always be the friend of us dragons. His voice was filled with gratification. Having existed for tens of thousands of years, he had long been prepared to face death. He reluctantly looked at Garamandes, Kagiosis, and his clansmen. The dragon god's head drooped, and he left with a smile. The death of a dragon god was like a huge rock that pressed down on the hearts of all the dragons. At the same time, it also brought some haze to this war. The dragon god had sacrificed his life to give the warriors of the Yangon continent a chance to recuperate. His death was completely worth it. Nian Bing was very clear about this. If the dragon god had not disregarded his own safety and used all his strength to severely injure Shi Jie, the war would have ended today. Just as the dragon god had said, although Shi Jie was only one person, he had the ability to destroy everything. The dragon god's physical body went through a simple ceremony according to the dragon's customs. His physical body was cremated, leaving behind the dragon soul and dragon pearl to be inherited by his son, the fire dragon king, Garamandes. As for his dragon armor and dragon bones, which had been manipulated, they were kept by the new dragon god, Kagios. Once the dragons found a place to store their principal and interest, these dragon bones and dragon armor would be kept in the dragon necropolis. A sorrowful atmosphere shrouded the entire Human Alliance army. They only understood the importance of this war after witnessing the true strength of the gods. The temporary meeting tent was still being held by the representatives of the four empires. However, one of the representatives had changed. Rong Yu's eyes were filled with worry. He sighed softly and said, "We made such ample preparations, but we didn't expect our losses to be so great. It seems that we still underestimated the strength of these gods." Luo Ro lowered her head and said, "The mistake this time is mine. I underestimated the enemy, which led to this situation." Nian Bing tried her best to conceal the sadness brought about by the passing of the dragon god. She patted Luo Ro's hand and said, "No, how can this be your fault? You didn't do anything wrong. Your plan was already perfect. It's just that the enemy's strength was too strong. You don't have to blame yourself. If it wasn't for your calm command in the face of danger, I'm afraid our losses would have been even greater. Uncle, how's grandfather's condition now?" Rong Yu sighed and said, "You should know that the Flaming Sun's Knights and the Order of the Fire Dragon were your grandfather's life's work. This time, the two Knight Orders were completely destroyed. The blow to the old man was too great. In addition, he suffered too much magic backlash in order to command the magicians. His body suffered a lot of injuries. Although he has already been treated, the old man is after all old. I'm afraid he won't be able to contribute in this war." After hearing Rong Zhao's words, Nian Bing felt a little relieved that Rong Qinwu's life wasn't in danger. However, he knew that this battle would become even more difficult. She took a deep breath to calm herself down and said, "Now is not the time to be sad, Roer. We need to carefully plan our next move. Although the first wave of attacks from the gods was repelled by us, it doesn't mean that we have the opportunity to occupy them. The dragon god's words before his death left a deep impression on me. If we want to truly defeat these gods, we have to kill the 5 main gods. Otherwise, as long as they are still alive, a disaster will happen to the Yangon continent. Let's first discuss the strength of both sides. Have you received a report on our losses?" Luo Ro shook her head and said, "It should be soon. This time, our losses are too great. It will take some time to count them. We should be able to get a report soon. How are the powerhouses on your side?" Nian Bing said, "The losses on our side can be said to be very small, but it can also be said to be very great. On our side, There are only a few people who can reach the 14th step. In the battle with the main gods and divine experts, although everyone suffered different degrees of injuries, they still have the strength to fight. Only the Fire Dragon King, Big Brother Garamandes, is not in a good condition. His injuries are more serious, and because of excessive grief, his injuries have worsened, although he's been treated by me. However, the dragon race's body's magic resistance is too strong. If the god's next attack is 10 days later, I'm afraid he won't be able to participate. The great loss I'm talking about is Lord Dragon God. He's definitely a 14-step expert, and he's practically the strongest on our side. His death has greatly reduced the strength of our powerhouses. However, with the addition of the dozens of dragons from the Dragon Clan, our overall strength didn't decrease too much. At least this time, we have the strength to confront those demigod gods head-on. Now, they are all recuperating from their injuries. Luo Ro nodded. I'm also very sad about the death of the dragon god. However, I have to say that his death was very valuable. The dragon god was an elder full of wisdom. In that situation, he managed to delay the enemy's strongest powerhouse in time and heavily injured him. That was why we were able to kill so many gods and weaken their strength. Now, there are two things we have to do. First, we have to prevent the enemy from launching a sneak attack. I'm afraid that the gods do not have any supplies. On this barren continent, they might not be able to hold on for 10 days before launching their attack. Second, we have to redeploy and be ready for their second attack. Nian Bing, do you still remember your worries? We still have to prepare. If they bypass us and head straight for the Yangon continent, then we have to redeploy. Nian Bing nodded and said, it's necessary to prevent a sneak attack, but I don't agree with the second point you mentioned. If not for today's battle, I would have such worries. However, through today's battle, I know that as long as the over-goddessy world is still around, the gods will not give up on a frontal attack. Today, we caused them great losses mainly because we ambushed them in advance. Moreover, with the sudden appearance of the dragons, we were able to deal a blow to their students. However, I'm afraid that it won't be so easy next time. As long as the over-gods and the god-ranked experts are not separated from the gods, I'm afraid that it will be difficult for us to gain an advantage with the over-goddessy world leading them. Therefore, I'm sure that they will still launch a frontal attack. Only by defeating us will they be able to obtain the supplies they need in the shortest time possible. Rongyu nodded and said, that's right. Nian Bing's words make sense. I also saw the situation at that time. The super magic that was launched by Father has always been the strongest attack of our Rong family. Your father, 2 uncles, and I all participated in it. The super magic that was launched by so many of us fire mages was actually stopped by the enemy alone. It's really terrifying. Frankly speaking, I don't have any confidence in this battle. However, we don't have a chance to retreat now. We can only have a chance if we fight to the death. Of course, they couldn't retreat now. Although there were many cavalrymen among the human warriors, how could horses outrun those powerful gods? Once they retreated, they would definitely be killed by the gods. Therefore, they had no way out now. Fortunately, the warriors from the Rangoon mainland had an endless supply of supplies at the rear. Through the spatial transmission created by Nian Bing, they could replenish their supplies at any time. Just like what Luo Ro had said previously, if they could continue to deplete their supplies, it would undoubtedly be very advantageous for the Rangoon mainland. Mu Jing, who had been silent all this while, suddenly said, then how should we deploy now? Since those gods have already fought with us, I'm afraid that any ambush will be useless when they come again. We can only face them head-on. However, I'm afraid that it will be very difficult for us to block their frontal attack. Just as Nian Bing was about to speak, a few people walked in from outside. Among them were Nian Bing's father, Rong Tian, as well as the subordinates of Luo Ro and Mu Jing. There was also Marshal Snow Soul, Grand Prize, and Bloodline Sex Ice Friend Hall, Mastering Zue. The 5 people who came in came to the 5 of them and whispered a few words to each other. Then, they quietly left. Rong Tian glanced at Nian Bing and gave his son an encouraging look. Judging from his father's pale face, It was obvious that he had suffered some damage from the new wave's attack. The 5 people who came in all had the same purpose, and that was to report the losses of the headquarters. Everyone's expression became serious, especially Rongyu. His handsome face was slightly distorted, and his eyes revealed a painful expression. Luo Ro said, "I'll go first. In this battle, our country has lost about 6,000 warriors and 3,000 are injured. Most of them are seriously injured, and it will be very difficult for us to have the strength to fight again. The magic crystal bubble army that I designed has been completely annihilated, and all 120 magicians have died." When she thought of her magic crystal cannon, Luo Ro's heart couldn't help but ache. That was a super weapon that had cost the Ottoman Empire's national strength. This time, it had been completely destroyed after only one shot. How could she not feel heartache? Mu Lijing said expressionlessly, "Comparatively speaking, our country's losses are slightly less. 4,000 warriors have died, and about 70 magicians have died from the backlash of Do Qi and the scattered attacks of the gods. About 3,000 warriors have been injured, and most of them are seriously injured and can no longer fight." Shuepai said, "The Ice Moon Empire has lost about 7,000 warriors, and the rest are about the same as the Ottoman Empire. However, the magicians of our country's Ice God Tower have not lost their battle prowess other than expending more magic power. This might be the only good news." When Shi Jie had destroyed the Ice Lotus, he had used up too much of his energy to destroy the flaming giant dragon, causing his strength to weaken slightly. Moreover, he had to immediately retreat to deal with the dragon god, so he had reserved some of his strength. He only destroyed the magic and did not cause too much of a backlash to the magicians of the Ice God Tower. With the strength of those ice magicians, they were able to completely resist it. Everyone's gaze fell on Rongyu. Rongyu smiled bitterly and said, "Our country's losses are too great. In this battle, all of our elite warriors have perished. The 2 knight regiments have more than 10,000 people, including their mounts, and about 3,000 ordinary warriors have died. Thousands of fire magicians have suffered different degrees of damage, causing the strength of the troops we brought here to be reduced by at least 2/3. I have no idea when the magicians will be able to fight again. This is the biggest problem for me now. Even my father, Prince Rong, has been seriously injured. He definitely can't fight anymore." Everyone was silent. The battle had only lasted less than 2 hours. The allied army of the Yangon continent had lost more than 30,000 elite warriors, including super powerhouses like the Dragon God. At this time, Nian Bing was also in a bad mood. Yin Tu had just reported the losses of the Bloodlion cult to him. The Bloodlion cult's losses were severe, far beyond Nian Bing's imagination. 500 blood guards, only 200 were left. As for the other elite warriors, 500 were dead. The Bloodlion cult's warriors had one thing in common. They were only dead and not injured. During the battle, they had given their all, even if it was their last bit of strength, to destroy the enemy. 2,000 elites. What did these 2,000 elites represent? If they were to be divided according to rank, Nian Bing's losses would not be any worse than the Huarong Empire's. Just those 500 blood guards alone had taken the Bloodlion cult a lot of effort to cultivate. In this battle, 300 of them had disappeared. Of the 2,000 elites, only 1,200 were left. Their strength had been reduced by at least half. Nian Bing did not dare to imagine such a loss in the past. At the same time, Yin Tu also told him. Now, there were less than 100 god-killing crossbows that were still controlled by people. He had discussed with the 7 elders of the cult and was now mobilizing the remaining powerhouses to train. They were striving to master the firing method and coordination of the god-killing crossbows in a short time. Only these super powerful crossbows could cause more damage to the deities. The silence continued. Everyone did not know what to say at this time. Such a heavy loss. This was something they could not have imagined before the battle. Regardless of the timing, location, and manpower, they had the absolute advantage. They had accurately grasped the time of the enemy's arrival. But even so, the result was still like this in the end. It could be seen how powerful the deities were. After a long time, Nian Bing was the first to break the silence. He said, "Although our losses are great, The enemy's losses are not small either. Under our planned attack, their losses are more than ours. After all, the deities are all powerhouses. We should be proud to be able to kill so many of them. Indeed, the head-on attack from the allied forces of the Yangon mainland had caused the deities to suffer a huge loss. Although the casualties were only divine servants and demigods, their numbers have been greatly reduced. Close to 6,000 deities left their corpses on the ground. At the same time, under Nian Bing's attack, 4 of the deities had died. One of them had lost his ability as a deity due to his arms being destroyed. In terms of the total number of deities, only 2/5 of the original deities were left. Their overall strength had been reduced by a little. Everyone's expression relaxed a little. Of course, they knew that it was already very good to achieve such a result. However, as long as they thought of the tyrannical strength of the She world, they could not feel happy. The enemy still had 5 overgods. The next attack would not be so simple. Although the enemy had lost quite a few people, the loss of the core strength was not too serious. At the very least, the enemy had only lost a few deities. Even the demigod-level deities had suffered very little damage. Luo Ro said, "Now, we should start to recalculate the strength of both sides. We need to adjust in time. Nian Bing, split the experts on your side into 2 groups for the time being. The group with lighter injuries will be responsible for preparing for battle at any time. Those with heavier injuries should rest and try to recover as soon as possible. The 2 groups will rotate and be ready to deal with the enemy's sneak attack at any time. On my side, the army also needs to be redeployed. Now, we can't concentrate our troops in one place. Otherwise, once the overgods attack with all their strength, the more concentrated our formation is, the more damage we will suffer. Now, we still have about 130,000 soldiers with full combat strength. As long as we cooperate well, we may still have a chance. Moreover, the enemy can sneak attack us. Can't we find an opportunity to sneak attack them? Now, I have an idea that I would like to discuss with all of you." Nian Bing nodded and said, "Go ahead." Although the human side had suffered great losses in the first battle, Luo Ro's on-the-spot commanding performance was praised by everyone. No one could replace her position as the military advisor. Luo Ro smiled and said, "I want to send some food and water to the deities." "What? Are you crazy? Have you forgotten our original plan?" Nian Bing cried out in alarm. Rong Yu, Mu Jing, and Xue Pe, who represented the other 3 empires, frowned. Feeding the deities until they were full? Were they going to attack them? They now suspected that Luo Ro's brain was in a mess due to the huge shock. Luo Ro smiled indifferently and said, "Of course, I have my reasons for doing this. First of all, the deities probably don't have any supplies now. This is why they have to fight with all their strength. Only then can they continue to live." From Nian Bing's description of the continent of gods, the reason why these gods are so powerful is because they have adapted to the environment of the godly continent. They have gradually formed in order to survive, and this makes them extremely attached to their lives. Therefore, in order to survive, they will bring us great losses if they fight with all their strength. Furthermore, their attacks will also take a long time to complete. This makes it impossible for us to react much. Even if we can block their second attack, it will be a huge loss to us. Our losses will also be great. However, what if they have supplies? The situation will be completely different. The main gods and deities can completely heal their injuries before attacking. That way, they will have more confidence. Once the battle starts, because they have supplies at the back, they will think that they still have a way out. They won't fight with all their might. Morale has a huge impact on combat strength. I'm sure you all understand this point. That's why I have this suggestion. As for whether it will be implemented or not, it will be up to us to discuss. After listening to Luo Ro's explanation, everyone calmed down. What she said made sense. Nian Bing thought for a moment. She said, "According to what you said, not only do we have to give them food and water, but we also have to give them food and water. Also, we can't let them know that this food and water is deliberately given to them, right?" Luo Ro smiled and nodded. "Yes, that's what I mean. Actually, this isn't a very difficult thing to do. I think that they who have always worked hard to survive will be very easy to use in this aspect. You don't have to rush to ask me what to do. First, we need to discuss whether this suggestion will be accepted. Ronyu nodded first and said, Prime Minister's explanation has enlightened me. I'm also a commander of an army. Indeed, when there is no supply, the soldiers will easily give their all to survive. If they give it their all, there is hope. If they don't give it their all, they will die. Under such circumstances, the soldiers will often unleash their greatest potential. Therefore, I think this plan is feasible. Mu Jing smiled and said, Of course I agree with Sister's suggestion. However, can we put some poison in the food and water? Once they eat and drink, then... Luo Ro didn't wait for Mu Jing to finish and immediately shook her head. That's impossible. With the strength of the gods, not to mention ordinary poisons, even if they have a lethal poison, I'm afraid they won't eat it so easily. How can people who have struggled for so many years not be careful when it comes to food and water? Therefore, we can't use this method. Moreover, the method I chose to give them food and water, if we put poison in it, I'm afraid we will be equally unlucky. Hearing Luo Ro's words, Nianbing immediately understood what she wanted to do. She nodded and said, All right, that's all we can do. I hope your psychological warfare will be effective. We need to act quickly in the next few days. Since Nianbing had agreed, Marshal Shui naturally had no objections and passed the decision unanimously. After that, it was time to discuss military arrangements and tactics. Nianbing didn't participate in the discussion. In terms of military affairs, he was far inferior to the people present. Moreover, he had his own matters to attend to. After coming out of the tent, Nianbing went directly to a small tent not far away. He stopped in front of the tent and said, I am Nianbing. May I come in? A low voice sounded from the tent. It's you. Come in. Nianbing lifted the tent flap and quietly walked in. There were two people in the tent. One was sitting on the ground at the side, looking at Nianbing. The other was cultivating. A faint green light flashed in front of her and gathered in her body. The two people in the tent were Fengyu and Ping Chao. In the previous battle, although Fengyu's undead magic had shocked both sides, it had greatly reduced the casualties of the Rangoon continent's allied forces. Otherwise, the number of casualties wouldn't have been as simple as 30,000. The final damage to the gods wouldn't have been so great. Ping Chao said in a low voice, Fengyu is fine. It's just that her magic power and spiritual force have been greatly exhausted. You also know that necromancy magic is a heaven-defying ability. She controlled so many undead at once. Although they had just died not long ago and their souls had yet to dissipate, for her body, the consumption was too great. I'm afraid it will take a long time for her to recover. Don't worry, with me here to protect her, she will be fine. In fact, Fengyu herself didn't want to use this kind of magic, but you saw it in today's battle. If she didn't use undead magic at that time, I'm afraid our losses would have been greater. Nianbing smiled and said, I don't have a dislike for undead magic. No matter what kind of ability it is, as long as it is used in the right place, then its effect will be good. Although undead magic is full of evil aura, Fengyu has a pair of clear eyes. So, I have always believed in her. You have worked hard during this time. Is there any problem with the current situation of those survivors? After listening to Nianbing's words, Ping Chao's face became a lot better. He showed a rare smile and said, Those survivors said that their current life is like heaven. After all, they no longer have to worry about food. Although these survivors have no memory of civilization, their ability to accept new things is very strong. In just a few days, under the guidance of Fengyu and I, they have already learned some things and basically understood what happened in the past. Especially those elf archers, they are too smart. With their archery skills, there's no problem for them to go to the battlefield. Hearing the word elf, Nianbing couldn't help but blush. Last time when he was asked to mate with that elf beauty, he still didn't forget the embarrassment. Brother Ping Chao, after Fengyu finishes her cultivation, please tell her that no matter how the Lost Continent is opened up by the 4 great empires, there will be a way out for these survivors. I will strive to ask the 4 great empires to build a city for them. Let the dwarves and elves continue to live on. Chapter 243. Ping Chao smiled faintly and said, Thank you. This is the first time I've seen Yu so serious about something. She seems to really treat those refugees as her own people. For Yu and those poor guys, I really have to thank you." Although he hadn't been in contact with Nian Bing for long, Ping Chao understood that the young man in front of him held an important position in the Yangon continent. Even the upper echelons of the four empires respected him, and the strength that Nian Bing displayed in the battle today made him admire him from the bottom of his heart. After all, he alone killed 3 of the enemy's God-ranked experts. If it wasn't for him, the enemies over gods and God-ranked experts wouldn't have been able to stop them. On the side of the Yangon continent, Nian Bing could be said to be the #1 expert. After leaving Ping Chao and Yu's tent, Nian Bing directly returned to his temporary tent. Feng Nu and Lan Shun were girls, and Nian Bing deliberately let the 7 Blade Souls protect them during the battle, so they didn't suffer any injuries. Now, together with Long Ling, they were helping the Ice God Tower's magicians to check their potential and arrange the next attack and defense. After all, the magicians were the only ones who could use large-scale joint magic. Whether it was Luo Ro or the leaders of the 4 empires, they attached great importance to this magician force. After returning to the tent, Nian Bing could no longer endure the weakness in his body. He immediately sat down on the ground. The battle today had consumed too much of his energy. The extreme tremors in his mental strength, as well as the continuous use of his domain, had taken a huge toll on him. Not only was his mana almost depleted, even his endless supply of mental strength was almost depleted. If it weren't for his stubbornness, if he didn't persevere, he probably wouldn't have been able to hold on. After today's battle, he had unknowingly become the spiritual leader of the Yangon continent's allied forces. Previously, when he was outside, even in front of his uncle and Luo Ro, he couldn't show any signs of fatigue. Otherwise, their confidence would suffer a huge blow. He came out early to see Yu. But the other reason was that he wanted to seize the time to recover his mental strength and magic power. Nian Bing possessed the vigorous Xiantian Qi, and her body naturally had the ability to recover. However, that kind of recovery was too slow. Only by entering a meditative state could he recover as much as possible. In these extraordinary times, without powerful strength as a guarantee, how could it work? Especially after listening to the words of the dragon god before his death, Nian Bing was even more aware of her own shortcomings. The speed of the retreat of the gods was very fast. When they retreated, it only took a moment for them to completely disappear from the sight of the Rangoon army. But in fact, they did not go far. They set up camp at the foot of a mountain 50 miles away from the Rangoon continent. The reason why they chose this place was naturally because of the terrain. It was easier to arrange accommodation on the mountain. Moreover, from a distance, they could vaguely see the general movements of the human army. For these deities, it was extremely easy for them to carve out a few caves in this kind of earthen mountain. A day had passed since the start of the first battle. The gods were still resting in the mountain. Because the battle yesterday had left a deep impression on them, the prideful gods actually sent out some demigod-level gods as scouts. They patrolled the surroundings. 10,000 years ago, the battle between the Lost Continent and the godly mainland was extremely difficult. After a long period of time, the number of deities was sharply reduced in that battle. After 10,000 years of recuperation, they had only recovered to about 10,000 deities. However, even in that battle, the loss of deities was gradually reduced by the special warriors of the Lost Continent. However, just yesterday, in just a short period of 2 hours, more than half of the 10,000 deities were lost. Such a blow could be said to be unprecedented in history. Even the ordinary gods were shocked to discover that the humans of the Rangoon continent were not as weak as they had imagined. Such a discovery caused the deities to feel apprehensive. If Shi Jie's tyrannical performance had not intimidated the other party and killed the dragon god who had betrayed the Rangoon army, the fear in the hearts of the gods would have been even greater. In the largest cave in the center of the mountain, Shi Jie was looking at the other gods with a gloomy face. When the army of deities retreated to this place, he immediately began to cultivate. It was only until now that he had woken up. At this moment, he was filled with anger after listening to the battle report. The death of close to 6,000 deities had caused his heart to be filled with murderous intent. Tell me, how did this happen? It has only been a few days since we left the godly mainland, and more than half of our invincible army of deities has been wiped out. What does this mean? If I hadn't blocked that large-scale super magic that day, I'm afraid this number would have increased by a lot. Can any of you tell me why there is such a large army waiting for us in the Rangoon continent? Can anyone tell me? Although Shi Jie's voice did not have a strong emotional fluctuation, the few gods who were familiar with him knew that the anger in his heart had risen to the peak. Below Shi Jie was a skinny god who looked to be in his 40s. He said, "It's because we were too confident in our own strength that we suffered such a huge loss. With our strength, although those humans are not weak, they shouldn't have been able to cause such a huge loss. The reason this happened was because we were ambushed and were completely passive. The other reason was because of the sudden betrayal of the dragons. I didn't expect that old thing, the dragon god, to choose to betray us at this time. We also underestimated the humans. There are more powerhouses among them than we thought. When we were fighting with them, the power of the territory that the blonde young man among them activated was extremely powerful. It seemed to be a pure energy territory, but it also seemed like a spiritual territory. The amplification effect was extremely terrifying. If it wasn't for his territory supporting those human powerhouses, the four of us would have killed them all. I feel that he is the biggest obstacle to us dominating this world. If we have the chance, we must destroy him first." Shi Jie's expression became slightly better. He nodded at the skinny god and said, "Lu Suo, as the god of exploration, you have 5 acupoints. You have 5 acupoints other than Li Zhong and Tianyan. Your analysis is correct. We were indeed too careless. If we had discovered their layout earlier, our losses would have been minimized. What's the most reasonable thing for us to do after this? Just tell us." A tall god next to Lu Suo snorted and said, "That old thing, the dragon god, has been killed by boss. The only ones who pose a real threat to us are those human powerhouses. As long as we are careful this time, we can face them head-on. I don't believe that they can stop us from charging at them head-on. We, the 5 great gods, will join forces. Who can stop us?" This person's voice was loud and clear. He was wearing a yellow armor. When he spoke, his entire body emitted a layer of arrogant hostility. Other than Shi Jie and the god of exploration, Lu Suo, the other 2 gods nodded at his words. It was obvious that they had done the same thing. Only by defeating the human army head-on would they be able to vent their resentment. Shi Jie snorted in disdain and said, "Kuangjuan, you're very domineering as the overlord god, but what were you doing in yesterday's battle? Were you sleepwalking? Humans are very intelligent, don't forget. Before we became gods, we were also humans. If they could beat us back the first time, they might be able to do it a second time. It's fine if we don't move, but if we attack again, we must completely destroy them. Therefore, we have to be very careful in all of our operations. We don't want to fall into their trap again. What about you guys? Tell me what you think." He looked at the other 2 core gods. The god standing furthest from the group frowned slightly and said, "Boss, although Kuangjuan is a little reckless, looking at the current situation, it seems that we don't have a good idea other than to do this. The rations we brought from the godly mainland are almost depleted these few days, especially drinking water, which is very scarce now. Our original plan was to kill the survivors of the Lost Continent and plunder their resources to support the Yangon continent. As long as we get there, we won't have to worry about supplies anymore. However, we are now blocked by the humans of the Yangon continent. We have 2 choices now. One is to go around them and reach the Yangon continent as soon as possible. After obtaining supplies, we'll show these humans how powerful we are. The other way is to completely defeat the human alliance in front of us and plunder their supplies. They have so many humans, so their supplies are definitely not a small number. It should be enough for us to use. The person who came back last time said that there's a large water source where the survivors live. Therefore, after killing these humans, we can still rest for a while before going to the Yangon continent. No. How can we go around them? I can't take this lying down. The tyrant god Kwangjuan's eyes shone fiercely as his fighting aura fluctuated unsteadily. It was as if he was going to devour them. In terms of combat power, he was the strongest among the 5 master gods in the Shi realm. Shi Jie raised his hand to stop Kwangjuan from getting angry and said, "Yes, Noah's words are very reasonable. As the wisdom god among the gods, his judgment is very correct. Now, we really only have these 2 choices. However, I won't choose the first one, not only for the dignity of the gods, but also for the sake of the facts. To be honest, 10,000 years have passed, and I have forgotten how big the Lost Continent is. From here to the Yangon continent, we can either split the space and directly travel through it, or we have to walk there. Although we can achieve the effect of space magic with our abilities, our subordinates don't have the ability to do so. However, our subordinates don't have the ability to do so, so we can't use this method. Therefore, we can only walk to the Yangon continent. However, we don't know how far this distance is and how long it will take. Once it takes too long, the combat power of the gods will be greatly reduced. On the other hand, the humans have sufficient supplies. If they chase after us from behind and meet up with the army in charge of guarding the Yangon continent, it will be very bad for us. Since they can intercept and kill us here, they must be prepared at the border between the Yangon continent and the Lost Continent. Therefore, we can only choose the first option that Noah mentioned. Only by killing these humans and plundering their supplies can we safely reach the Yangon continent. Now, what we need to do is not only to destroy them, but also to minimize our losses. We only have about 4,000 people now, and we can't afford to lose anymore. There are 4 empires in the Yangon continent with tens of millions of people. Although we are gods, there are times when we are exhausted. Therefore, we need to maintain enough strength. Yes, I agree with the boss's suggestion. Let's do it this way. Let's come up with a good plan and kill every single one of them. In fact, I thought so too. It seems that the boss and I really think alike. The only overgod who hadn't spoken up until now finally spoke up. His broken gong sound immediately caused the other overgods to reveal looks of disdain. The tyrant god, Kuang Yun, was the one who couldn't hide the most. He snorted disdainfully and said, "Cyan, should I call you the god of lasciviousness or the god of flattery? If you hadn't been so timid in yesterday's battle, maybe we would have killed all those humans." Cyan was slightly angry and said, "Kuang Yun, be polite. I'm telling the truth. My name is the Silver God. I like all kinds of gems, not some damn god of lasciviousness. You've been insulting me for 10,000 years. Haven't you insulted me enough?" The wisdom god, Noah, was obviously on Kuang Yun's side. He sneered and said, "Silver God, you are clearly the god of lasciviousness. On the continent of gods, who doesn't know that you have a wide range of interests? You can't even let go of a female beast. Among those low-level divine servants, I'm afraid only a few have been defiled by you. Our king god's long life is the most thorough use by you. If it weren't for the limited number of gods, I'm afraid that at least millions of women would have been killed by you in these 10,000 years." Cyan's appearance was extremely obscene. If Nian Bing was here to observe him carefully, she would find his eyes very familiar. Because his eyes were clearly similar to Kitty's pet fox. They were both obscene, but this silver god's eyes were more obscene. Cyan saw that no one was helping him and muttered, "Forget it. I know you're jealous of me. I won't say anything." Noah ignored him and turned to Shi Jie and said, "Boss, since you have now decided on our direction of action, then we must act quickly. Otherwise, without food and water, the fighting power of our gods will gradually decline." Shi Jie just nodded and was about to say something when a voice suddenly came from outside the cave. "That's great, boss. That's great." A hurried figure flashed into the cave. Cyan, who had been holding his breath, now found a target to vent his anger. A golden light flashed in his hand, and a surge of combat energy suddenly collided with the person who came. He shouted angrily, "Which bastard dares to barge in so rashly?" The person who came suddenly screamed under the golden light. A milky white light came out of his body and resisted the attack of the golden light, but he still hit the stone wall in the cave heavily. Cyan, stop. Shi Jie stopped the silver god, who was about to go forward and continue to attack. There was a hint of surprise in his eyes because the person who came was Xia Yu, who he had demoted to an ordinary god-level master. As a former king god, although Xia Yu was demoted, his strength was still stronger than an ordinary god-level master. If it were not for the fact that he did not have the Huangji acupoint, Cyan would not be his opponent. Xia Yu, why are you so flustered? I seem to have heard you say something like, "That's great." Can you say that we are in a situation like this? Although Shi Jie was a little dissatisfied with Cyan's sudden attack, he saw that it was Xia Yu. He did not blame Cyan anymore. After all, if Xia Yu could bring back more reliable information, the loss this time would not be so great. If it were not for the fact that the number of gods was greatly reduced, Shi Jie would have vented his anger on him. Xia Yu got up from the ground. She wiped the blood from her mouth and looked at Cyan with hatred. Boss, oh no, Lord God, I said that's great because we found a water source and food. Shi Jie's eyes moved. Oh, where did you find it? What did you find? Xia Yu hurriedly said, not far from the foot of the mountain. Today, when I accidentally walked by the foot of the mountain, I suddenly felt the sound of a water vein underground. You know it too. I also have the cloud listening acupoint. My hearing is definitely not wrong. Then I asked a few demigods to dig up the place, according to what I found. In the end, not only did they find drinkable water, but there was also a type of fatty fish in the water. With these fish and water, although it is not enough to satisfy the food needs of all gods, it greatly alleviates our current situation. That's why I disturbed you when I came in just now. Tyrant God laughed and said, Good job, Xia Yu. Who said you were the god of misfortune? I think you should be called the god of fortune instead. Damn it, with water and food, those fellows from Yangon will die much easier. I'll go get some food first. I've been wanting to eat for a long time. Stop. Shi Jie shouted at Tyrant God and Kuang Yun. He turned to Xia Yu and said, Have you checked it yourself? Xia Yu hurriedly nodded. She said, I've checked it carefully. It's definitely a drinkable water source. The fish is also not bad. Although it's not very big, there are still quite a lot of them. Why don't I catch a few for you to check? Shi Jie waved his hand and said, No need. Kuang Yun, go ahead and check it again carefully. We gods are indeed taken care of by the heavens. It seems that unifying this world is the mission given to us by the heavens. Wisdom God, Noah frowned and said, Water vein? Why is there a water vein here? Isn't this too much of a coincidence? Could it be a ploy by those humans? Sion looked at him with disdain and said, Are those humans crazy? They give us food and water and then wait for us to chop their heads off? I say, Noah, don't think of everything as so complicated. This is an opportunity given to us by the heavens. Don't forget, we are gods. With Boss here, even the heavens have to give us some leeway. This food and water is used by the heavens to please Boss. Noah glared at Sion and said, I really want to chop you to death, you idiot. Sion did not back down and said, Come at me if you can. Do you think I'm afraid of you? Other than him, the only one he was not afraid of was Wisdom God Noah. All right, stop arguing. Since the situation has changed, we should also change our strategy. Noah, send some people to observe the movements of the humans from the Yangon continent. Order our people to rest here. We will move in a few days. Noah said, Boss, as the saying goes, the first drum of energy, the second will weaken, and the third will be exhausted. I think it's better for us to act as soon as possible. Otherwise, if there are any changes, I'm afraid we won't even have the chance to regret. Shi Jie said indifferently, I know what to do. Although our army is not moving, it doesn't mean that our actions are completely stagnant. Tonight, the four of you will make a trip. With your abilities, it won't be difficult to infiltrate the human alliance. I'll give you a mission. The mission is simple. Kill the young man who used spiritual energy to attack. Under the premise of ensuring your own safety and completing the mission, do your best to kill the enemy powerhouses. They know how to ambush, but don't we know how to launch a sneak attack? Naturally, he did not expect the Yangon Continent's alliance to be prepared for a sneak attack. However, he still gave such an order. After all, Sion, Noah, and the others were all at the level of overgods. They all had earth spirit points, and 2 of them even had cloud listening points. With the ability of their acupuncture points, it would not be difficult to infiltrate the human alliance. No matter how strong Yinbing was, it would not be difficult for the 4 overgods to kill him. At least, that was what Shi Jie thought. Noah looked at Shi Jie and immediately understood the king of overgod's intention. He nodded gently and retreated. Sion said hesitantly, "Boss, I was injured that day. Why don't we let the 3 of them go today? I won't make a difference." Shi Jie looked at him coldly and said, "Are you trying to challenge my authority? Serene, don't use your wits on me, or else. Otherwise, I'll make you regret being born into this world. I heard that there's a kind of person in the palace of the human world called eunuchs. If we turn you into a eunuch, I think the female gods under us will be very happy." Sion's face stiffened, and he immediately said righteously, "Boss, don't worry. I promise to complete the mission tonight. He's just an ordinary human. I won't kill him. I won't come back to see you." What a joke. The most precious thing in this world was the little bug below him. Without that thing, what was the point of living? The overgods retreated, and Shi Jie was the only one left in the cave. His face suddenly changed, and his breathing became heavier. Naturally, he knew the principle of finishing the mission in one go. However, if it was not a last resort, he would not do it. He definitely did not want to do that. Other than himself, no one knew how serious his injuries were. Although the battle with the dragon god seemed peaceful, only the 2 of them knew how dangerous it was. The dragon god's powerful abilities and extremely strong dragon body were enough to pose a threat to Shi Jie. Furthermore, he had blocked 2 powerful magic spells and had no choice but to go all out in the battle with the dragon god. After the dragon god was killed, his injuries worsened under the effect of the dragon language magic. Until now, he had only recovered about 40%. If it were not for the fact that he had 3 ultimate Emperor acupoints, he would have perished together with the dragon god. He wanted to recover to his best condition. He needed at least 15 days. He was more or less wary of human mages, and through his observation of the human army, he could tell that the human mages were very powerful. Based on his observation of the human alliance, it was obvious that there was an expert guiding them. If he wanted to destroy the magicians in the war, there was only one way, and that was to step over the corpses of all the warriors and strong opponents. However, Shi Jie could not let the other overgods know the extent of his injuries. Although they knew that he was injured, if they knew that Shi Jie was so severely injured, the position of Overgod King would change. The position of Overgod King could control all the gods. Hegeman God Kuang Yin had been coveting this position for a long time. He was definitely not as boorish as he appeared to be. Shi Jie was deeply aware of this. Night fell. After tonight, the first battle would have been over for 2 days. Nian Bing stood at the entrance of her tent and breathed in the slightly cool air. She wondered if the overgods had discovered the water vein. Naturally, the water vein was not naturally formed. With the dark demon rat, it was not difficult to drill a tunnel and then lead the lake water from their side into it. Naturally, the water vein was formed. As for the fish, it was even simpler. How did the survivors of the lost continent survive? It was these fish that gave them the ability to survive. The fish in the lake were their only food. When the water in the lake was pumped up by the magicians, Luo Ro discovered that there were many of these fish. Now that the survivors of the lost continent had food from the Rangoon Continent Alliance, they no longer needed to eat fish. To them, ordinary coarse grain was much more delicious than the fish that they had been eating since they were young. Night gradually fell, and the moonlight was as gentle as water. Nian Bing smiled as she looked at the sky. Luo Ro's overall arrangement had begun. The human army's greatest advantage was their supplies in numbers. However, was this advantage really that obvious? Nian Bing's strength had completely recovered. The special characteristics of his acupuncture points allowed him to recover much faster than ordinary people. However, he was very worried now. Whenever he thought about the strength displayed by the Heavenly Hope world, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. He knew that if he used his spiritual power to attack the Heavenly Hope world directly, the chances of success would be at most 30%. Jia must have known about his abilities. Under the circumstances where he was prepared, he who had 3 extreme Emperor acupuncture points would definitely be able to hide his spiritual energy very deeply. To be able to reach his level of strength, there was no doubt that he had a strong will. Taking a deep breath, Nian Bing returned to his tent and began to cultivate. Although he could only sharpen his spear at the last minute, this was the only thing he could do before the war began. The 2 sisters, Feng Nu and Lan Chun, were in charge of patrolling the night. Kitty stuck her head out and looked around as she shuttled back and forth in the camp. She had grown up in the Valley of the Caucasians and was very interested in the formation of the army. That day, it could be said that she had made a great contribution. Her pets had killed countless divine servants with the help of Fox Nana's super enhancement ability. The number of divine servants was definitely not less than the number of dragons. After all, among Kitty's pets, there were a few major magical beasts from the godly mainland. Although the death of the 9-clawed poisonous spider made her sad for a while, she did not raise it since it was young. Under everyone's consolation, she quickly returned to normal. Most of the soldiers in the camp had already rested. That battle had not only left a large number of injured people, but had also dealt a huge blow to the morale of the human soldiers. After witnessing a battle between real powerhouses, they finally understood how insignificant they were. They needed a rest to recover their fighting spirit. Only groups of patrolling soldiers were shuttling back and forth between the camps, vigilant of every little change. Kitty ran out of her tent because she couldn't sleep. Looking at the moonlight in the sky, she said to herself, "Dad, Mom, I've already killed so many divine servants. I don't know if this counts as revenge for you. You must bless Kitty and Brother Nianbing. You must kill those divine servants and not leave a single one behind. Kill them all. They're simply too abominable. Even the dragon god was killed by them. Brother Garamandes is still sad. He's really pitiful, just like Kitty in the past." Kitty was a kind-hearted little girl. The death of her parents and clansmen had a great impact on her. It was also from then on that she gradually grew up and was no longer the innocent little girl she used to be. On the surface, although she didn't seem to have changed much, she had now learned to think. Suddenly, Kitty's mental strength fluctuated, and her beautiful little face suddenly showed a trace of astonishment. In terms of mental strength, Nianbing was naturally the strongest in the Rangoon continent. But in addition to Nianbing, Kitty was second. As a summoning magician, apart from pets, the only thing she could use to attack enemies was her spiritual power. With the spiritual power passed on to her by her parents, as well as her hard work these days, Kitty's spiritual power had made great progress. The sudden appearance of the spiritual wave gave her a fright. Her spiritual power immediately spread out to the surroundings. What made her a little scared was that she actually found 4 abnormally large amounts of energy at once. These energies were full of murderous intent. Obviously, they didn't belong to the strong people on her side. What's more, in her side, there were only 4 strong people of this level in front of her. She had to count Nianbing's Emperor Kurobutsu. Chapter 244. The sudden warning in Kitty's heart surprised her greatly, and at the same time, she was a little flustered. However, she quickly calmed down and stood still because she could clearly feel that the aura of those 4 people was firmly locked on her. As long as she made the slightest movement, she was afraid that they would immediately attack her crazily. Therefore, she could not move. However, as a summoning magician who was beyond the level of a magus, Kitty naturally had her own way. She controlled her psychic power and quietly slipped to the side. Although there was some distance between where she and Nianbing lived, her psychic power was enough to transmit to her. At the same time, she also sent out a signal for help. The psychic power she transmitted was very subtle. Only the most powerful would be able to sense it. 4 faint figures appeared out of thin air. One of them quietly disappeared, while the other 3 turned into phantoms from 3 different directions and pounced toward Kitty. The highest level of a summoning magician was to use the ability of a summoned beast as their own in an instant. However, at the same time, the faint light locked onto Kitty's body. However, at this moment, The three figures clearly felt that the psychic power they had locked onto was empty. At this moment, they immediately launched an attack without hesitation. Kitty's body shattered, but it was only a phantom that shattered. A huge cockroach appeared on the ground. It looked at the three overgods floating around it with its innocent eyes. With a flash, its body instantly became the size of an ordinary cockroach. It drilled through the two overgods and directly disappeared into the crack in the ground. The sudden change shocked the three overgods. They had sneaked into the allied army of the Rangoon continent to kill Nianbing. However, the allied army camp was very large. It was not easy to find Nianbing's residence. With Nianbing's psychic power, it was too easy for her to make some camouflage simulated psychic forms. Therefore, they were prepared to capture someone to ask where Nianbing was. Soon, they found Kitty wandering in the camp. Kitty's pet army had left a deep impression on them. In terms of damage to ordinary gods, Kitty's pets were comparable to dragons. Under the stimulation of Fox's special ability, each of his pets was more terrifying than the last. Only the nine-clawed poisonous spider died after its leg was cut off. The other pets had all retreated unscathed after achieving great results. Therefore, as soon as the four overgods saw her, they immediately felt that they were in luck. With Kitty's strength, she was obviously a core member of the allied army. Naturally, she would know Nianbing's whereabouts. Moreover, even if she could not find Nianbing, killing such an expert who was enough to threaten them, it was not a wasted trip. Therefore, they separated Overlord and Kwang Jun to guard at the side, while the other three went all out to catch Kitty. In their minds, even if Kitty was a little stronger, it was impossible for her to escape from the three overgods. However, they forgot that Kitty was not only a summoner, but also a psychic magician. Relying on her psychic power to simulate her body shape and aura, Kitty had already summoned Xiang the cockroach when she discovered them. Light and shadow flashed. Kitty appeared more than 10 feet away. As soon as Xiang's phantom disappeared, her original body, which had secretly escaped, was naturally exposed. At the moment when the overgods were stunned, silver light flashed around Kitty's body. The golden cow dandy, the chrysanthemum piguan, and the dark demon mouse Tian and her son appeared almost at the same time. In the sudden golden light, Kitty's body rose, and the golden light appeared. It was the nine-tailed dragon, Little Stutter. The originally empty space in the camp was completely filled. When the three overgods reacted, for magical beasts had already pounced on them. At the same time, two loud phoenix cries sounded at the same time. Damn it! The silver deity Cyan cursed unwillingly. The three overgods punched at the same time, and the four magical beasts that were pouncing on them were sent flying back at a faster speed than when they came, crashing into the tents at the side. Suddenly, screams sounded one after another. The Rangoon continent's allied army was suddenly awakened by the loud phoenix cries, and a large number of troops appeared from their respective camps. Two rays of red and blue light appeared at the same time when the three overgods rushed toward Kitty. Two different auras of ice and fire instantly filled the air. Seeing the golden light radiating from the three overgods, Feng Nu and Lan Chen's first reaction was to protect Kitty. Their figures instantly entered the eighth change of the phoenix. The huge body of the phoenix met the attacks of the three overgods in the bright red and blue light. At this time, the seven-colored light had already lit up on one side of the camp. Suddenly receiving Kitty's call for help, Nianbing immediately woke up from her cultivation and rushed here as fast as she could. Seven sword souls appeared out of thin air, only slightly slower than Feng Nu and Lan Chen. They rushed toward the three overgods from behind. Nianbing used teleportation magic to follow behind the seven sword souls. However, just as the seven sword souls flashed by, a tall black figure happened to intercept them. A huge fist went straight for Nianbing's chest. With the aura locked, a huge golden light pillar with a diameter of 5 feet enveloped Nianbing's body. The tyrant god's hidden purpose was to wait for Nianbing to come to her rescue. He deliberately did not stop the seven sword souls, and when Nianbing appeared, he suddenly attacked. The wisdom god, Noah, shouted, kill these two phoenixes first. Ignoring the approaching sword souls behind them, the three overgods' bodies instantly became illusory. Under the effect of the earthly spirit point, they charged forward at a speed faster than Feng Nu and Lan Shun. The ultimate realm of the Emperor Acupoint burst forth in an instant, and a golden light went straight for the two huge phoenixes. The suffocating, surging energy immediately caused the originally agile ice and fire phoenixes to feel as if they had sunk into a swamp. At this time, they still had the ability to escape. In the 8th Phoenix transformation, they were completely capable of flying high into the air before the three overgods' attacks arrived. However, they had no intention of dodging at all. This was because Kitty was right behind them. Although Kitty was protected by Little Stutterer, the 9 dragonettes, she would only end up being killed in an instant when faced with the attacks of the three overgods. The two sisters, Feng Nu and Lan Shun, were telepathically connected. The ice and fire energies were instantly activated to their strongest state. With an indomitable aura, they faced the attacks of the two overgods head-on. Nian Bing's current situation was also very bad. After being sealed by the overbearing energy from the Emperor Acupoint, he was completely unable to teleport at all. Although Nian Bing had an extraordinary physique, he was still a mage. However, he was still a magician. In terms of physical combat, even a martial saint would be able to beat him to a pulp, let alone a core god. At this critical juncture, Nian Bing's rich combat experience played a decisive role. His charging body instantly retreated half a step when the golden light appeared. Immediately after, a golden light erupted from between his eyebrows. His hands lit up with red and blue light, respectively, and he clasped them in front of him. Nian Bing also had the ultimate Emperor Acupoint. However, he had never used it in the form of an energy attack. At this time, facing the attack of the Emperor Acupoint, the Sky Eye domain was no longer effective. Thus, he chose the most direct method. With the help of his spiritual power, Nian Bing's Emperor Acupoint pierced into the tyrant god's attack like a needle. The moment the two Emperor Acupoint's energies collided in the air, a golden light burst out. After all, Nian Bing's attack was rushed. Furthermore, the Emperor Acupoint appeared in the same position as the Sky Eye Acupoint. Although the Sky Eye Acupoint had a great support and amplification effect, its attack power was not as good as the Emperor Acupoint that the Tyrant God had cultivated for who knew how many years. Furthermore, the Tyrant God was waiting to attack. The golden light from his right fist only paused for a moment before swallowing the attack from Nian Bing's forehead. However, this slight pause gave Nian Bing an opportunity. A huge ice prism appeared diagonally in front of him. Although the huge mirror, which was a mixture of red and blue light, was shattered by the golden light released by Hegemon God, it still reflected the attack of Nian Bing's extreme Emperor Acupoint into the sky, illuminating the entire camp. After dealing with the Tyrant God surprise attack, Nian Bing did not feel the slightest bit excited. She cried out involuntarily, "Dodge!" His gaze just happened to see the illusory figures of Noah and the other two overgods rushing in front of Feng Nu and her sister. His heart instantly sank to the bottom. He was very familiar with the strength of overgods. Without any support, the result of going head-on against an overgod was obvious. Although the sword souls were fast, they were still about 10 feet away from the three overgods. Although they would arrive in the next instant, that short moment was enough for an overgod to do many things. The Tyrant God was extremely pleased with himself as he attacked Nian Bing. In his opinion, Nian Bing's strongest strength was the 7 sword souls and the supportive magical domain. Ordinary magic was completely useless against his combat energy. Even when he saw Nian Bing's Emperor Acupoint attack, he did not take Nian Bing seriously. Even if a young man was strong and talented, there was no way he could be compared to him, who had cultivated for tens of thousands of years. However, although his attack reached Nian Bing, it was cleverly neutralized by Nian Bing. At this moment, it was not that Kuang Yin did not want to continue attacking, but that he could not attack for the time being. Nian Bing's Emperor Acupoint was indeed inferior to his, but her mental strength was higher than his. When faced with Kuang Yun's Emperor Acupoint energy, the golden light that shot out from between Nian Bing's eyebrows not only contained the energy of the Emperor Acupoint, but also her own powerful mental strength. When the two energies of the Emperor Acupoint collided, the mental strength passed through and accurately entered Kuang Yun's body. Although this was not enough to kill him, there was a sudden piercing pain in his brain. The intense vibration of the mental strength caused Kuang Yun's body to stop moving for a moment. At the same time, he remembered the few God-ranked experts who had died under Nian Bing's mental strength attack. He hurriedly stabilized his mental strength and cautiously looked at Nian Bing, preventing her from launching another mental attack on him. In fact, Nian Bing's body was also greatly shaken. Mental strength attacks were originally meant to harm the enemy as well as oneself. Among the gods, Hegemon God Kuang Yun was second only to the over-god of the Hope world. His mental strength was extremely stable. Although Nian Bing's attack had caused a certain amount of damage to him, Nian Bing himself was also heavily injured. Moreover, although he had reflected the attack from the Emperor Acupoint, his opponent's sudden full-force attack had still injured Nian Bing's meridians. He screamed for Feng Nu and Lan Chen to dodge, but he could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood. If the god of time of the true gods was here, perhaps he would have the ability to freeze time in an instant. However, there was no one here who could control time like him. Therefore, what was supposed to happen had happened in the end. When Feng Nu and Long Ling's full-force phoenix flames came into contact with the attacks of the three over-gods, they could clearly feel the difference between the sky I field and the sky I field. There is a huge difference between a level 13 and a level 14. Moreover, it was 3 level 14 masters attacking 2 level 13 phoenixes. There's only one outcome, and that was instant kill. The reason why the wisdom god Noah did not hesitate to endure the attacks from the 7 sword souls behind him to launch a full-force attack on the ice and fire phoenixes was for this instant kill. Although the sword souls could hurt them, they definitely could not kill them. If they could kill the ice and fire phoenixes, the strength of the Rangoon continent's allied forces would be greatly reduced. Moreover, behind the ice and fire phoenixes was the allied forces' only summoner. As long as they could kill all 3 girls, even if they did not succeed in killing Nian Bing this time, their mission would have been completed perfectly. Kitty saw the 2 sisters who loved her bravely facing the enemy, and the 4 pets she had pounced on previously were still alive. At this critical moment, she did not hesitate to launch a psychic energy attack at the 3 over-gods. As a psychic magician, she instantly dispersed her psychic energy to give Feng Nu and Lan Chen a chance to escape. Even if she knew what would happen to her if her 2 sisters left, she still did not hesitate to do so. When Nian Bing shouted, she launched a psychic energy attack while shouting anxiously at the same time. However, Feng Nu and Lan Chen had already made up their minds when they discovered the 3 over-gods. They saw the appearance of the 7 sword souls, and also saw Ma Luan's short and stout figure rushing over at the fastest speed. Bing Jie and Bing Ling were also in the midst of preparing their magic. As long as they could block the attacks of the 3 over-gods, Kitty would be safe. In the hearts of Feng Nu and Lan Chen, Kitty had always been their favorite little sister. Her innocence was deeply loved by everyone. Moreover, she was already the last member of the white race. If she died like this, the white race would really disappear from this continent forever. How could they watch their cute little sister die like this? They had heard Nian Bing's call, and they had also heard Kitty's cry. However, they still faced the attacks of the over-gods. At the moment when they were about to collide with the intense golden light, the 2 girls' phoenix-like eyes shone brightly on Nian Bing. There was no sadness, only deep attachment. Kitty's spiritual magic attack was not weak. However, when her spiritual magic was divided into 3 and faced the 3 over-gods, the only effect it had was to slightly slow down the speed of the attacks of the 3 over-gods. However, the golden light still swallowed up all the blue and red light, as well as the 2 beautiful figures. Seeing his 2 wives disappear, Nian Bing's heartbeat instantly stopped. Even if he had a strong vitality and a recovery magic that could bring the dead back to life, it was impossible for him to revive his wife who had been reduced to powder. Immense sorrow instantly spread to every cell in his body. Nian Bing's eyes instantly turned blood red. Without any hesitation, his spiritual energy poured out. He no longer cared about who he was facing and shot out his physical spiritual attack from his Tianyin acupoint without any reservation. The light was like lightning, and He Jimin God Kuang Yun had no chance of dodging at all. He could only grit his teeth and bear the attack while launching his attack. The same golden light appeared on the two of them. There was the golden light from his own attack, and there was also the golden light from his opponent's attack. This was a strange and tragic battle. Nian Bing's attack was completely made of spiritual energy. He did not even try to block He Jimin God Kuang Yun's Huang Ji acupoint's energy. The physical spiritual attack passed through his opponent's attack and directly entered Kuang Yun's body. Kuang Yun's full-powered attack also went straight for Nian Bing's defenseless body. At this moment, perhaps because of the intense sorrow in his heart, Nian Bing's Fangjia acupoint, which had just emitted a milky white light, suddenly turned golden. At this moment, his acupuncture points had actually evolved, and not just the Fangjia acupoint. At the same time, the West Meridian acupoint, which was closely related to the Fangjia acupoint, also evolved to the ultimate realm. If it was any other time, Nian Bing would have been overjoyed to suddenly feel a huge increase in his strength. But now, there was only despair and sorrow in his heart. With a loud bang, his body was sent flying, landing directly hundreds of feet away. Kuang Yun's title of He Jimin God did not come out of nowhere. Although the ultimate realm of the Fangjia acupoint was enough to block many attacks, it could not block his full-powered attack. That solidified golden light smashed through the defense of the Fangjia acupoint like a giant hammer and forcibly shook Nian Bing's chest. At that moment, Yi Zichen was stunned. Inside Nian Bing's body, the little dragon king, Oscar, wanted to rush out to help Nian Bing block this fatal attack more than once. But Nian Bing forcibly suppressed him with his spiritual energy. If Oscar had been the one to block the tyrant god's all-out attack, Nian Bing might have been able to survive. However, Oscar would have disappeared from this world forever. Nian Bing had already lost two of his wives. How could he lose his partner as well? Until the moment when the golden light was about to touch his body, Nian Bing released Oscar. At the same time, a surge of vitality was released. Oscar's recent cultivation of the Dragon God's Heart Sutra was extremely fast. Although leaving Nian Bing's body would greatly affect the speed of his growth, it was no longer fatal. Therefore, under such circumstances, Oscar was released by Nian Bing. He naturally understood that Nian Bing was going to bear the opponent's attack alone, and despair appeared in his heart at the same time. Ever since he was born, he had gained wisdom. He had never been separated from Nian Bing for a day. To him, Nian Bing was a friend, an elder brother, and also gave him the care of father. Every time Nian Bing cultivated, he would deliberately condense a large amount of Xiantian Qi and inject it into his body. Otherwise, how could his Dragon God's Heart Sutra have improved so many times in such a short time? At the same time, when Nian Bing's spiritual energy rushed into He Jimin God's body, his body instantly froze, and a golden mist drifted out from his 7 apertures. His eyes became a little dull, and his tall body swayed. He roared fiercely, and 7 pillars of blood spurted out from his 7 apertures, dyeing his domineering face red. A surge of blood suddenly shot out from his lower abdomen, and a large amount of fire attribute Xiantian Qi suddenly rushed up and rushed into his brain. Now, only a large amount of Xiantian Qi could resist Nian Bing's spiritual energy. Nian Bing's attack in his despair was too terrifying, and the mental shackles that Kuang Yun thought were firm were broken one by one. At this time, he had no choice. In order to save his life, he had no choice but to choose to explode his West Meridian acupoint and use the Xiantian Qi to withstand the enormous pressure. His eyes had turned blood red, and the surging red light was extremely frightening. Exploding an acupoint could bring power beyond one's own strength. Although it was only for a short period of time, It was extremely terrifying for an overgod to explode. Even so, Kuang Yun's spiritual energy was still defeated by the Xiantian Qi from exploding his acupoints. This was the first time he felt fear, and this feeling was so real at this time. Kuang Yun panicked. He could clearly feel that the spiritual energy rushing into his brain was incomparably condensed, and it also carried the unique, domineering aura of the Huangji acupoint. Blood kept dripping from his 7 apertures, and the thick red crystal necklace around his neck shattered, and a red stream of energy flowed into his body. He also had a supra-divine tool, and that was the fire crystal necklace that amplified his fire attribute Xiantian Qi. Although he rarely used his fire attribute Xiantian Qi after gaining the Huangji acupoint, this supra-divine tool-grade necklace finally saved his life at this time. With the help of the necklace and the Xiantian Qi from exploding his acupoints, his spiritual energy went all out to contend with Yin Bing's spiritual energy. Seeing that short figure rushing towards him, even the arrogant Hegemon god had no choice but to retreat. After all, saving his own life was the best choice. Using the Earth Spirit Cave to escape was indeed a good choice. In that faint illusion, the Hegemon god's Kuang Yun fully embodied the traditions of a god. In a situation where he was heavily injured, he did not care about the other 3 and turned to run, causing Shu Luan's axe to hit empty air. Shu Luan did not chase after him. His figure turned in the air, and he rushed in another direction, straight towards the other 3 overgods. In the instant when Yin Bing was blown away by that intense golden light, when his Fangjia acupoint, which had displayed its ultimate defense for the first time, was broken, even he himself thought that he would follow Feng Nu and Lan Shun. At that moment, there was no longer any sadness or anger in his heart. Everything seemed to have become unimportant. Perhaps following the woman he loved the most was the happiest thing in life. However, in the instant when his body was about to disappear under the attack of Kuang Yun's Huangji acupoint at his chest, the 2 balls of light, one black and one white, in the Liz Hong acupoint suddenly spun violently. A vigorous aura of life instantly protected his body, and a black light filled with deathly stillness appeared out of thin air, turning into an impenetrable solid shield. It forcibly blocked the golden light of the Huangji acupoint. The aura of life nourished his body, and the aura of death resisted the attacks from the outside world. Yin Bing's heart suddenly entered an ethereal state, and the magic in his body circulated at high speed. Although he still could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood, his body still came to a stop after smashing through a tent. Although he had suffered some serious injuries, the damage to his body was not very serious. Only the backlash of his mental strength caused his brain to feel dizzy. The sphere of life and the sphere of death protected Yin Bing's body at the most critical moment. Yin Bing, who had landed on the ground, was somewhat at a loss. He did not even know whether this outcome was a blessing or a tragedy for him. The 7 sword souls were not idle. When Feng Nu and Lan Shun were turned into ashes under the ferocious attacks of the 3 overgods, they had already arrived behind the 3 overgods. Feng Nu and Lan Shun were 8 transformation phoenixes. After all, they had unleashed their greatest potential before dying. Although the 3 overgods had destroyed them, under the effects of the 2 special rebounding forces of ice and fire, their bodies were shaken. Their bodies trembled at the same time, and their charging speed immediately slowed down. The 7 sword souls were telepathically connected to Yin Bing. The pain in Yin Bing's heart was their pain at the same time. They attacked Emperor Kurobutsu without holding back. 7 rays of light of completely different colors blasted into the bodies of the 3 overgods. Halos of light circulated, and the powerful defensive power of the Fangjia acupoint saved the lives of the 3 overgods. If it were not for the Fangjia acupoint's powerful defensive power, they would not have exposed their backs to the 7 sword souls. 3 mouthfuls of blood were spat out at the same time. The 3 overgods actually used the momentum of the 7 sword souls' frenzied attacks to charge directly at Kitty. They could clearly sense what was happening to Hegemon god Kuang Jun. Their goal was very simple: As long as they could kill Kitty, they could retreat unscathed. Although Kwang Jun's injuries were severe, they were not fatal. After all, Kwang Jun was not someone Xiaoyu could compare to. Although exploding one of his West Meridian acupoints would greatly reduce his overall abilities, he could still maintain his strength as an overgod. However, he would be demoted from the second overgod to the weakest overgod. As long as the three of them could destroy Kitty, they would be able to greatly reduce the strength of the Human Alliance Army's powerhouses. Their goal for the sneak attack would be achieved. After all, the Sword Souls were not humans. Although they could think, they were still enraged by Nian Bing's actions. When they realized that the three overgods were charging at Kitty at the same time, they could not stop them in time. The golden light appeared again. This time, the golden light's target was Kitty and Little Stutterer. At this moment, Kitty had calmed down. The deaths of Feng Nu and Lan Shun, as well as the despair in Nian Bing's eyes, had caused a drastic change in the little girl's mentality. Seeing the three overgods charging at her, Kitty's eyes turned completely silver. She did not summon her own magical beasts. To her, every summoned beast had its own life. Since she could not block the enemy's attacks, why should she let them die in vain? Kitty's heart had always been very soft. However, at this moment, her heart was in intense pain, as if it was being bitten by a poisonous snake. When Feng Nu and Lan Shun looked at Nianbing before they left, her pure heart was deeply hurt. She did not plan to continue living because she did not know how to face her big brother Nianbing. If it were not for her, how could her two big sisters, Feng Nu and Lan Shun, have died? A faint silver light condensed in Kitty's eyes. At this moment, those distant and lifeless eyes actually emitted a substantial light. In the midst of despair and endless sorrow, Kitty's spiritual magic finally made another breakthrough. She became the second person after Nianbing to possess a substantial spiritual attack. This time, she only chose one target, the god of wisdom, Noah. The silver light in her eyes converged into a beam of light a foot in front of her and suddenly shot towards Noah. Since she was going to die, she had to try her best to drag someone down with her. What Kitty was thinking now was that she could avenge her two big sisters at the same time as she died. Noah was shocked when he saw the silver light. Under the guidance of his spiritual power, he could clearly feel that Kitty's target was him. Without any hesitation, he immediately condensed his spiritual power. He did not know how Kitty's spiritual power was compared to Nianbing's, but the scene of the gods under him being attacked by a substantial spiritual attack was deeply engraved in his mind. He definitely did not want to become another victim of a substantial spiritual attack. In order to deal with Nianbing's substantial spiritual attack, he had already made some preparations before this sneak attack. While his forward momentum did not change, he quickly took out a milky white pearl from his chest. A milky white light instantly enveloped his head, and the silver light that shot out from Kitty's eyes arrived at the same time. This milky white pearl was one of the most precious ores on the mainland of gods. It was called the God Protection Crystal. The few overgods had different choices for these precious ores. Even though Shi Jie was the most powerful among them, he could only choose one to forge that super godly sword. As for the god of wisdom, Noah, he was the only one among the overgods whose spiritual power could contend with Shi Jie's. In order to achieve the same level of strength as Shi Jie in the future, he had been working hard on his spiritual level cultivation, hoping to reach the level of a substantial spiritual attack. Therefore, he chose the God Protection Crystal, a special gem that could store spiritual power. The milky white pearl in his hand was the purest God Protection Crystal that had been refined countless times. It contained the spiritual power that he had accumulated. At this time, the external spiritual power and his own spiritual power actually resisted Kitty's attack. Although Noah still felt a little weak in his brain during the spiritual attack, he still succeeded. Chapter 245. Kitty was already right in front of her. As the golden light flickered, she actually withdrew the gigantic nine-headed dragon. She closed her eyes, and 2 drops of crystal-clear tears fell from the corners of Kitty's eyes. She was not sad because she was about to die, but because she was unwilling to accept that she had not killed a king before she died. Those were tears of unwillingness and despair. She knew that her fate could not be changed. Regardless of whether it was the seven sword souls that were chasing after the gods at lightning speed or Shulin, who was flying at high speed from another direction, it was impossible for them to arrive before the three king gods attacked her. Since everything was destined, she could only accept it. In Kitty's heart, death was not something to be afraid of. She had always thought that death was just a way to go from one world to another. When she arrived at the other world, not only would she be able to see her two sisters who had died for her, but she would also be able to see her parents and clansmen. Although Big Brother Yinbing was not there, she was satisfied. Just as Kitty was prepared to accept her death, a sudden sound caused her to open her eyes again. When she opened her eyes again, they were filled with surprise. This was because the sound she heard was the resonant cry of a phoenix. That sound was so familiar. Although it sounded like the same voice, she could clearly distinguish two different feelings in that voice. One was ice, and the other was fire. The camp on the mainland of Yangon was no longer shrouded in darkness because the darkness had been dispersed. Blue and red lights illuminated every corner of the camp. They were like two different suns that were emitting light that illuminated the earth. Those were flames. The red and blue flames appeared right in front of Kitty. The flames burned fiercely, and the huge flames rose to nearly 300 meters into the air. However, it did not cause a change in temperature. It was neither hot nor cold. However, the surging energy waves caused the three king gods to stop in their tracks. When they heard the resonant cry of a phoenix from the two flames, their hearts were filled with. There was no time for hesitation. They made a decision almost at the same time and turned around abruptly. The three of them combined their powers and repelled the seven sword souls that were chasing after them. The strange phenomenon that appeared in front of them made them feel that something was wrong. Now, running away seemed to be the best choice. All of this happened at the same time. When Yin Bing broke out of the tent and barely managed to stabilize himself, he happened to see the three main gods pouncing towards Kitty. He was just about to use his teleportation spell to save her when he saw the red and blue flames appear. What did the flame of 1,000 feet represent? Why didn't the flames have any temperature? At this moment, Yin Bing's eyes, which had been filled with despair, suddenly turned into ecstasy. This was because he thought of two words: Nirvana Rebirth. It was a Nirvana rebirth that only belonged to the Phoenix clan. That's right, the Phoenix was known as the immortal bird. How could his wives die so easily? During the Great War of the Divine Remains, their ancestor, the Phoenix, was only able to block the attacks of so many chief gods because of its ability to be reborn from the ashes. Tears appeared in Yin Bing's eyes again. However, this time it was because of excitement. Two gigantic phoenixes in the form of flames appeared out of thin air. Each of them was 1,000 feet long. They stood upright in the air and spread their huge wings. Flames burned on every part of their bodies, and an indescribable feeling arose from their bodies. At first glance, the red flames did not seem to be any different from ordinary flames. However, upon closer inspection, one would realize that not only was there no heat generated from the red flames, but even the fiery red light was illusory. Yes, those were not real flames. Instead, they were the soul fire that came from the Phoenix's soul. Only through the burning of the soul fire could they be reborn from the ashes. The blue flames were the same as the red flames. They were both illusory soul fire. However, the red fire phoenix exuded an awe-inspiring aura of righteousness, while the blue fire phoenix exuded a surging aura of death. It did not bring with it an evil aura, but a pure aura of death. Enveloped by the aura of death, everyone could not help but tremble. This was also the reason why the three chief gods chose to retreat instead of continuing to attack when the two auras appeared at the same time. Yin Bing appeared in front of the two fire phoenixes and surrounded the three chief gods from behind. At the same time, Bing Ling and Bing Jie's magic arrived as well. Together with the seven sword souls and Bai Lun, they surrounded the three chief gods. Although Yin Bing was injured, She immediately activated her heavenly eye domain as soon as she appeared. A rainbow light enveloped the battlefield, and the seven sword souls and by Luan's attack power instantly increased. Under the ingenious control of her mental strength, when the two ice god spears shot out by Bing Ling and Bing Jie arrived, the power of the ice magic was immediately raised to the maximum with the help of the heavenly eye domain. Although the three chief gods resisted with all their might, they could only barely protect themselves from being injured. It was impossible for them to counterattack with a sneak attack. At this moment, Nian Bing and the rest's attacks were as strong as iron buckets. No matter which one they chose to attack, they would attract the combined attacks of all the experts on Nian Bing's side. Without a doubt, the chief gods had a long history. In such a passive situation, their 14th level strength immediately showed their advantage. Although Nian Bing's heavenly eye domain had a great effect, she could not attack again because of her battle with the tyrant god Kuang Yin earlier. As a result, the seven sword souls, together with Bai Luan and the two ice gods' descent masters, could only trap the three chief gods, but could not really hurt them. After all, it was not easy to break through the ultimate level of the Fangjia acupoint. Moreover, the three chief gods all had as many as 5 acupoints. Every single one of them was shining with golden light as they dealt with the attacks. The two giant phoenixes in the sky began to change. Their burning soul flames gradually converged. When the flames converged to a height of around 30 meters, the nirvanic rebirth process was finally complete. 2 perfect phoenixes appeared in the sky. Compared to their 8th transformation, their bodies were several times larger. Every single feather was slender and translucent. In particular, their resplendent eyes shone with a dazzling luster like gemstones in the night sky. The fire phoenix opened its mouth slightly, and a red flame descended from the sky. The flame was only as thick as an arm, but when it entered Nian Bing's heavenly eye domain, it could not be detected. However, when it entered the heavenly eye domain, Nian Bing could clearly sense that her heavenly eye domain had no effect on this special flame. It could neither strengthen nor weaken it. She suddenly thought of the legend of the Feng people that Feng Yin had told her when she was in the Feng people's territory. The strongest ability of the Feng people was the true phoenix fire. Could this be the true phoenix fire? If that was the case, then Feng Nu and Lan Shun must have reached the 9th transformation of the phoenix. In other words, they were already real phoenixes now. There had always been only one phoenix, but this time there were 2. Just as Nian Bing was thinking, the fire phoenix's flame had already descended on the silver god Sion. Sion naturally did not want to be burned by this flame. However, the 3 overgods had to face multiple attacks at the same time, and he was the weakest one among them. When the Phoenix True Fire arrived, he was knocked back by Si Luan's full-powered axe strike under the buff of Sky's eye domain. Si Luan, in his berserk state, possessed terrifying strength, and with the help of Sky's eye domain and 2 super artifacts, he could contend with an overgod. In the head-on clash with Sei and Sion was immediately pushed back, and he happened to be enveloped by the true Phoenix Fire. What was the greatest characteristic of the true Phoenix Fire? That was to destroy all defensive energy obstacles. Nian Bing's heavenly eye domain could not affect the true Phoenix Fire, and Sion's square armor acupuncture point naturally could not do it. A burnt smell came, and Sion's body instantly turned black. From top to bottom, all of his hair turned into flying ash. It was a critical moment. He hurriedly raised his hands to block and stimulated a surge of energy in his Huangji acupuncture point. This barely blocked the true Phoenix Fire. However, once the 3 overgods lost one of their attacks, they were immediately unable to fend off the expert from the Yangon continent led by Nian Bing. Although the overgods had the advantage of speed brought by the earthly spirit cave, this advantage did not have a good effect in front of Nian Bing. Under the gaze of the heavenly eye acupuncture point, what kind of speed could not follow? The 7 sword souls were telepathically connected with Nian Bing. After the heavenly eye acupuncture point easily found the direction of the overgod's movement, the 7 sword souls could often intercept and kill them on the way. At this time, the overgods' bodies would inevitably pause. As long as there was a slight pause, the ice magic, and by Luin's god, slaying axe would fall on them. The flames of the ice phoenix were not much slower than the flames of the fire phoenix. The blue light was filled with a deathly aura. Compared to the true phoenix fire of the fire phoenix, the blue true phoenix fire was less gorgeous, but more profound. The blue light floated down and directly entered the battle circle. Its target was the silver god Sion. However, this time, it did not really fall on Sion. At the side, the god of wisdom, Noah, suddenly let out a loud roar. His illusory body simultaneously released several tens of surging auras that could cause the weather to change. The instant the people surrounding them were pushed back, he pressed his palm into the air, blocking the true phoenix fire that the ice phoenix had released. Go! In a situation where there were so many human masters and there was no backup, retreating was the best choice. Among the overgods, he hated Scene the most. However, he had no choice but to help Scene at this moment. The attack power of the two flames had clearly reached level 14. If Scene died under their combined attack, then all three of them would have to die here today. Therefore, he did not hesitate to use his ability to force the surrounding Rangoon powerhouses to retreat and rescue Scene. With their speed, this was the best chance to escape. The silver god Cyan had always been the most cunning among the main gods. Seeing Noah's sudden burst of power and force the enemy to retreat, and the other main god had already begun to fly out with all his might, he naturally would not stop. One had to admit that in terms of escaping, Cyan was extremely talented. He extended his body and instantly chased after the main god in front of him into the air. Noah was infuriated. His anger had reached its peak. Although his previous all-out attack had forced the surrounding people to retreat and block the attack of the Ice Phoenix, it had consumed a lot of his energy. In the previous battle, the three overgods had held back so that they would have a better chance to escape. As soon as Noah created an opportunity to escape, he wanted the other two overgods to help him, and then the three of them could escape together. However, the other two guys ran faster than the other. Obviously, they had no intention of helping him. As soon as the two escaped, Noah, who had not recovered from the consumption of energy, was one step slower. The black light, like a long rainbow, chased after Sion, who was running into second place with a gorgeous arc normally. With the strength of the silver god Sion, it would be easy to deal with the attack of the demon-devouring blade, whether it was dodging or blocking. However, he had just been burned by the Fire Phoenix's true Phoenix fire, and the severe pain all over his body greatly affected his judgment. When he felt the dark breath of the demon-devouring blade, his body only had time to flash in the air slightly, and the demon-devouring blade swept past him. Sion screamed and suddenly accelerated, fleeing into the distance. 3 out of the 4 main gods had escaped, but Noah, the last remaining one, was not so lucky. Just as his heart was filled with rage, 2 flames with different auras ignited in the air at the same time. As his body flipped, he suddenly descended. The ice and fire phoenixes left behind a beautiful trail of flames in the air. The red and blue lights seemed to have completely fused together. The loud phoenix cry resounded through the 9 heavens, leaving behind afterimages of the phoenixes. In the distorted space, they formed a red and blue cone-shaped force that headed straight for the god of wisdom, Noah. Noah was a little panicked. At the critical moment, he had to choose to explode his acupoints. Under the encirclement of so many masters of the Rangoon continent's allied forces, he could only choose to explode his acupoints if he wanted to escape. With a thought, his psychic power triggered the Huangji acupoint in his body. Just when his acupoint was about to explode, Noah suddenly saw a faint golden light. It was an illusory light, but it was also full of the aura of death. He saw the ruthless smile on Yin Bing's face, and his brain trembled violently as if it had been hit by a giant hammer. The energy that had just condensed suddenly dispersed. The Huangji acupoint was only a little bit away from exploding, but it was just this little bit that made him unable to see the sun tomorrow. When the huge energy of the Ice Phoenix and the Fire Phoenix reached him, It had already condensed into a solid body that was only 3 meters long. The light and shadow passed through with infinite unwillingness and resentment. Noah, the god of wisdom's body, instantly stopped. The red and blue light stopped 10 meters behind him and transformed into human figures. Noah's body drifted away in a gentle breeze, leaving no trace behind. Even his spiritual brand was burned to ashes by the two super flames. The entire Rangoon continent's allied forces cheered thunderously. This was the first time they had killed a master of the overgod level. The success this time had tipped the scales of the war in their favor. Nian Bing's figure flashed, and she arrived in front of the red and blue figures. She hugged them tightly in her arms. When she deeply felt the bouncy and perfect bodies, she finally believed that she had not lost the love of her life. It did not matter whether the overgod was dead or not. What was more important was that the two women she loved had come back alive. What could be more wonderful than that? Luo Ro, who was commanding the army, Mu Jing, who was standing in the distance, and Kitty, who had just escaped the brink of death, all looked at the three people who were hugging each other. There was no jealousy in their eyes, only envy. Feng Nu and Lan Chen's hearts were still beating violently at this moment. Although they did not regret risking their lives for Kitty, in the depths of their hearts, how could they bear to part with Nian Bing? Now, everything had become so perfect. They had not died, and they had even succeeded in killing an overgod. This was enough to change the outcome of the entire war, but it was not as wonderful as being in Nian Bing's warm embrace. When Feng Nu and Lan Chun faced the full-powered attacks of the three overgods head-on, they thought they were finished. Their 20 years of life had come to an end, and they had lost everything. Although they were unwilling, at that moment, they had no other choice. The full-powered attacks of the three level 14 overgods were extremely terrifying. With the strength of the two level 13 experts, there was no suspense at all. Their bodies were turned to dust by the surging energy of the Huangji acupoints. However, just when they thought that their lives were about to end, they were surprised to find that their souls still existed. At that moment, they heard a beautiful sound at the same time. It was the sound of heartbeats. Their heartbeats were not fast, but the sound they felt had the exact same rhythm. In that beautiful melody, they suddenly realized something. Suddenly, they discovered that their souls had begun to burn. As soon as this happened, Phoenix Maiden and Lan Chun thought that their souls were about to dissipate. However, as the invisible flame became more and more intense, they were surprised to find that the heartbeat in the depths of their souls became more and more violent. Their souls were also burning in the scorching soul fire in this throbbing heartbeat. They were becoming more and more powerful. Their soul fire went from formless to tangible. Their souls that had inherited the royal bloodline of the Phoenixes had reached a whole new level as they burned. When the red and blue flames appeared out of nowhere and scared off the three overgods, the three overgods were all stunned. Feng Nu and Lan Chen suddenly understood. That moving heartbeat was coming from the heart of the Phoenix. They finally understood why they had been unable to comprehend the true essence of the heart of the Phoenix and reach the 9th transformation of the Phoenix, becoming a true Phoenix. It was because they had not gone through the process that a Phoenix had to go through. That was the process of a Phoenix's rebirth. Only by going through the process of rebirth could one truly transform from a human body into a Phoenix's true form and achieve the highest ability that their ancestors possessed. This surprise attack came quickly and ended quickly as well. From Kitty's discovery of the four overgods to Noah's destruction, it only took a few minutes. The allied army of the Sunshine Continent, which had almost lost 3 level 13 experts in the surprise attack, had completely changed because of the sudden transformation of the two Phoenixes. Other than Nian Bing, who was slightly injured, the allied army of the Sunshine Continent did not suffer any substantial losses. However, the 4 overgods who came to the surprise attack were either severely injured or dead. Such a result was not only unexpected by Nian Bing, but also by the overgods Shi Jie. When the 3 fleeing overgods returned to the army of gods, Shi Jie had just woken up from his cultivation state. Tyrant god Wang Qi's miserable state really shocked him. Wang Qi was the first to return. He had no choice but to explode his West Meridian point. Even so, his spiritual energy was still severely injured by Nianbing. In his grief and indignation, Nianbing's spiritual energy went all out. Although Wang Qi had a divine weapon to protect his body and use his West Meridian point to explode in exchange for a large amount of Xiantian Qi to protect his spiritual domain, Nianbing's physical spiritual energy attack was too overbearing. Wang Qi barely managed to return to Shi Jie's side. Jie immediately fell into a coma. Shi Jie checked his body and found that Wang Qi did not suffer any injuries due to the excessive use of women. However, his spiritual energy was in complete chaos. What was even more frightening was that his soul seemed to have suffered heavy injuries. Although his Huangji Point, Diling Point, and Lizhong Point were still intact, he had completely entered a state of deep sleep in order to recover his soul. As for how long he would be in deep sleep, even Shi Jie did not know. Shi Jie's heart could not help but tighten when Wang Qi suffered such injuries. He did not need to ask to know who had done this. When he thought about the other three overgods, he could not help but frown deeply. His eyes shone with a sinister light. He also wanted to save the other three overgods. After all, the overgods' positions in the army of gods were too important. They were the absolute backbone of the army. However, he did not leave his cultivation cave. Only 2 days had passed since the start of the first battle. Shi Jie's injuries had only recovered by less than 50%. Not to mention tyrant god Wang Qi. Even the weakest of the 5 overgods, the silver god Xian, was slightly stronger than him. On that day, although he appeared to be very impressive in the battle, how could he not pay a price for killing the dragon god? The dragon god's strength might not be as strong as tyrant god Wang Qi, but he had the innate advantage of dragons. The body of a dragon and the draconic magic had caused a lot of problems for Shi Jie. It had greatly overdrawn his combat power. However, this was not the real reason why he had suffered such heavy injuries. The real reason for the slow recovery of his Shi realm strength was mainly due to the 2 spells that Suo Xiong had resolved. Furthermore, the super spells launched by thousands of mages from the Huarong Empire under the leadership of Prince Rong and several archmages had brought great pressure to the Shi realm. After resolving that super large-scale spell, Suo Xiong and Suo Xiong didn't even have time to catch their breath before they had to deal with another Ice Lotus spell launched by hundreds of Ice Element mages from the Ice Celestial Tower. If it were any other time, a single level 14 spell would not pose any threat to the Shi world. However, after dealing with these 2 spells in succession and then fighting a battle with the dragon god, his incomparably strong body could no longer bear it. Fire and ice were 2 types of limits. Although Shi Jie was the king of the main gods, he was not as weak as Shi Jie. When the dragon god died in battle and wanted to resolve it, these 2 types of magic had already caused great damage to his body. If Ying Wei had not felt that he would not be able to withstand this kind of damage, he would not have been able to withstand it. Why would Shi Jie order the gods to retreat? After returning to this place, he immediately began to cultivate in seclusion. During these 2 days, he had been fighting against the ice and fire abilities. However, it was not an easy task. It was precisely because of this reason that Shi Jie did not follow the other 4 overgods to launch a sneak attack on the allied forces of the Rangoon continent. In his plan, the 4 overgods would weaken the strength of many parties to a certain extent and even kill the young man who was the spiritual leader of the allied forces of the Rangoon continent. Once his strength was fully recovered, he would be able to kill Shi Jie. Once he had fully recovered, it would be impossible for the Rangoon continent's allied forces to block the attacks of the gods. The plan was perfect, but changes kept happening. When Shi Jie used his combat energy to help Wang Ji stop the bleeding and sealed his damaged acupuncture points so that the innate Qi would not leak out, the other 2 main gods had returned. Although the 2 of them looked better than Wang Ji, they were not much better off. This was especially so for the silver god Shan. His lower body was covered in blood, and his spirit was exhausted. When the 2 of them finally returned, Shi Jie's breath was unstable as he shouted angrily, "What happened? How did you guys end up like this?" Where's Noah? Where did Noah go? Sean looked at Shi Jia with a pale face. He now had the urge to cry. His acupuncture points did not explode, and his strength did not suffer much damage. However, when Emperor Kobutsu stabbed him before he left, he fell into an abyss of pain. In everyone's eyes, the silver god should be called the god of lust. However, Emperor Kurobutsu's slash in the air had accidentally cut off the thing he was most proud of. The physical pain was far less than the mental blow. Sean was a person who could not stand loneliness. One of the main reasons he was able to stay on the continent of gods for so many years was because of the female gods. However, now he had lost the most fundamental thing of a man. Other than the deep resentment in his heart, there was only endless pain. Noah is dead. I'm also injured. Those humans from the Yangon continent are too scary. Noah was killed by the two phoenixes in order to protect us. If we didn't run fast enough, I'm afraid we wouldn't have been able to return. The injury on his lower body had been sealed by his combat energy and was no longer bleeding. However, Sean's heart was bleeding at this moment. Faced with Shi Jie's accusation, he endured the pain in his heart and gave a simple account of the battle. After listening to Sean's account, even someone as strong as Shi Jie could not help but gasp. When they first stepped into the Lost Continent, they had a total of 6 main gods. At that time, if the dragon god was included, they had a total of 6 main gods. However, the current situation had completely changed. Due to the complete awakening of the two phoenixes, the other side now had at least 5 or 6 powerhouses of the 14th step and above. Their numbers were actually more than their own side. Could this battle still continue? On their side, even if the half-dead tyrant god Wang Qi was included, they only had 4 main gods. Although they were confident that they were at least equivalent to 2 to 3 level 14 powerhouses, the war had progressed to this stage. Even if the gods could win in the end, they would have to pay a huge price. Shi Jie was somewhat silent. He did not blame Sean and the others. He told them to go back and rest. Even if he wanted to send these master gods out, he couldn't really do it. Now, the true gods could only rely on them. From the moment they entered the Lost Continent until now, everything that happened was not as good as they had expected. Not only did they not manage to kill the refugees of the Lost Continent, they even lost a large number of true gods. Thinking of this, Shi Jie's brain could not help but work quickly. After a short period of thinking, he had made a decision. Since they had already arrived at the Lost Continent, they could not retreat before they won. Otherwise, the gods would not have the chance to touch the Lost Continent and Yangon Continent. After all, the other side had a large number of people. As long as the godly mainland existed, they would always be vigilant. They might even cultivate more powerhouses and sharp weapons to deal with the godly mainland. If he led the gods to retreat, it was very likely that these Rangoon continent's powerhouses would kill their way to the godly mainland in the near future. Up until now, the strength of both sides had changed from the advantage of the gods to a balance. No one could be sure that they would win in the end. Since that was the case, under the situation where they did not lack water and food, they could only wait for a while and make plans after they had recovered. At this time, Shi Jie had another idea. However, he needed to fully recover his strength before he could carry it out. The feeling of going from sadness to joy was the most wonderful. Before the war began, or more accurately, after arriving at the Lost Continent, Nian Bing tried his best to avoid being together with his wives. This was because he wanted to set an example for his subordinates in the Bloodline sect. He did not want others to see him slacking off because of his personal affairs. Therefore, in these few months, even if he was intimate with his wives, he did it secretly. Even though the Rangoon continent's allied forces knew that there was a powerful young powerhouse on their side, they did not know that the two Phoenix beauties were his wives.